the workshop to order at 12 o'clock. It is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, and I will turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a nice agenda today. We're looking forward to some good conversations regarding the progress of the school district of Indian River County. Our first item on the agenda is Parental Bill of Rights, sponsored by Ms. Berenborg. As you know, our own representative for the House Florida District 54 is Erin Grahl, and she is with us today. She brought forward House Bill 241, which is known as the Parental Bill of Rights. That bill was signed into law July 1, and we as a district, Ms. Grahl's home district, is looking forward from leading from the front and creating a policy that ensures all other districts can look at the school district of Indian River County on how this work is being done. Me and my team have had the opportunity to engage with Erin, because she says Erin, earlier in this week and created a plan, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for the board to hear from Erin firsthand and the work that we will collectively be doing together. As you know, we have created an office for parental and community engagement. That office is fully staffed and is just now up on onboarding its work. So this comes at a perfect time for us to really take the next step in ensuring we as a system and a district are designed in a way to meet the needs of parents, providing them access and input as it relates to the development and education of their children. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Berenborg for remarks and introduction of Erin Grahl.
Hello, good morning. Apologize that my video is not working. I hope you can hear me.
We can't.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to Representative Grahl for being here today. I thought it was important that we listen to the author of the bill and now law so that we can understand exactly what this entails for us and for our schools, and also to clear up any misunderstandings that are out there. So thank you to Representative Grahl. And now, Dr. Moore, if you'll take it over.
Thank you very much for having me today, and Dr. Moore, thank you for engaging with your team last week to discuss the bill and the now law, Chapter 1014, and I'm just excited to be here. I think in general, parents, I think back to a few years ago when I was on the Children's Services Advisory Committee, and the Learning Alliance had put on a program that they were presenting to us, and they had gone through 1 year, and I can't actually remember the name of the first program, what it was called, but the year they came back to renew and talk to us about what had happened, they decided to rename the program Smart Babies. And they renamed it Smart Babies because they said there isn't a parent that doesn't want a smart baby. And it's just always resonated with me because I think that's, in general, that's what parents want. Parents want what are best for their children. Parents want to be able to navigate the systems that their children are involved in. Parents want to feel engaged, but we know that there are so many different types of parents, and we know that there are so many different abilities of parents to engage depending on what their life looks like. And so the goal of this really is, after seeing many years of programs in which we always strive for greater parental involvement because we know that it means greater outcomes for children. The goal in this bill is to engage parents at every level, make sure government's engaging with parents at every level, make sure the institutions that interact with our children are engaging with parents at every level, and that parents are able to do that in an easy to navigate way, as opposed to, and that is part of the thought of structures and organizations and government such as yours. And so that's really what was the impetus for the bill, why I brought it forward, why we worked so diligently in the House and in the Senate to have it passed. And I'm excited to work with our school district on implementation. So happy to answer any questions that I can.
Go ahead. Yep.
Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Obviously, when the bill came out, there's, and now a law, there's interpretation, and somebody has some other idea. So, Erin, can you explain to us, because it's coming down to our teachers with our administrators and support staff and parents together. What is it that has changed as far as reporting to parents? And I have a staff bill analysis, but I just want to hear it from you.
Okay. Well, and I appreciate the opportunity to share how I believe this will be implemented. The disclaimer I gave to your team was that although I am a licensed attorney, I practice in a different area of law, and so I do believe that there will be things that in this bill that case law may come forward in the future if there has to be an interpretation. I don't play that role as a legislator. I play the role, as the bill sponsor, and so there will, I'm sure, be different interpretations throughout the state on what some of these provisions mean. I've gotten a lot of questions around the healthcare provisions in particular. I think that for me, there were a few components that are a little bit different. The requirement of if somebody knows that interacts with children, knows that a crime has been committed against a child, and it hasn't been committed by the parent must be notified. There were school districts in which there were things that had happened to children. DCF wasn't notified. Now, the obligation to notify the parent can go away if, in fact, the mandatory reporter reports to DCF, right? So, but I've seen various school districts, and even within school districts, various schools look at their mandatory reporting differently. They don't, and they make judgment calls on whether or not DCF should be called, or maybe have an internal policy that we don't prefer to call DCF, and so we're going to try and work around that when, in fact, if you're a mandatory reporter, you should be going to DCF, and if it's not something that involves the parents, I believe that the parents should be contacted immediately. That's what the bill the law sets forth. Also, another part of the bill was that you cannot coerce or encourage a child to withhold information from their parent. And so I think that sometimes there's confusion over what a confidential relationship is. And there should not be the perception of a confidential relationship between a student and a teacher or a school district employee. There are confidential relationships defined in law with an attorney, with a medical provider, with a pastor. There's not a confidential relationship that should exist to leave the parent outside of a conversation. So it's not that there's a mandatory reporting aspect of that disclosure maybe to a school district employee or to a teacher, but it's that school district employee or teacher cannot encourage or coerce the child to keep information from their parent. And so I think that that's a distinction that's important and would be involved in any type of training protocols around the bill.
And I'm sorry, one more question. I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Schiff. I've been talking to Mr. Seymour about this, and I was at the FHSAA for several years and started getting questions from athletic trainers and doctors. So, and as a former principal, didn't have a doctor on the field all the time, but we always had a trainer on the field, but doctors usually for football. And I had the trauma helicopter from Holmes come a few times to the field. So what has changed, if anything, there other than reporting? Now, I know the bill says if it's a life-death situation, but what I don't want happening is a trainer or a doctor saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. So can you give me a summary there?
So when a child participates in sports, not just at a school district, but anywhere, there's usually paperwork filled out, consent paperwork, consent to treat within the scope of any injuries or anything maybe that would even happen while that child was in the custody and care of the school district. Maybe it's not on the field, but it's on a school bus traveling. So you would have consent to treat through that mechanism that already exists.
Okay.
I do think that it's worth looking at those consent forms to make sure that it covers, the entire scope of time that a child would be within the custody or care of the school district and when they are at other participating schools.
Okay, we contacted FHSA, Mr. Seymour. I don't think any action's been taken yet, but I know they're working on that. So, as long as that didn't change, I feel a lot more comfortable because we had situations, had the doctor or trainer not intervened, it could have been a more serious incident, so.
And it does not there's also a Good Samaritan statute in the state of Florida that permits any doctor. So if you have a doctor sitting in the stands when something happens and they are more equipped to respond, they still have civil immunity if they go to treat in that situation. They do not have criminal immunity. They've never had criminal immunity from that. So in that situation, so the bill did nothing to change the Good Samaritan statute, and treatment can still be provided pursuant to the Good Samaritan statute.
Thank you.
Ms. Schiff.
Dr. Schiff.
Thank you. Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Couple things. You've said them, and I want to elevate and just make sure that they're really clear. My understanding, in any confidentiality issue, including LGBTQ+, is that if a student says something to a teacher or a counselor or an administrator, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yes, I mean, that's a ringtone.
The marching band will be along soon, don't worry.
There's been some confusion about, so I just want to make sure it's 150% clear, that there is no mandatory obligation to report to a parent. There is just an obligation to not counsel a student, to not talk to their parents. I realize that's a double negative, but, right?
Yeah, with regard to the disclosure of that type of information to a teacher, yes. If a student were to say to teacher A, I am gay, that teacher could not say, I encourage you to not tell your parent. Please withhold that information from your parent. I think that is the distinction. That's correct. That doesn't prevent that student from telling the teacher that. It should be noted, though, that there is no confidential relationship that exists in terms of that teacher-child interaction, where if a parent asked, there's nothing that a teacher should feel would prevent them from telling the parent if a parent asked that question of a teacher, for some reason, if it were ever to come up. I mean, if it was sought. Does that make sense?
So to follow up, there's not an expectation of confidentiality. However, if a child said to a teacher or counselor or whomever, I'm questioning, I'm questioning, I'm not sure, or I am gay, or whatever that is. Clear, the teacher cannot say, don't tell your parents.
Yes.
Clear. If a parent comes to that person and says, gee, I kind of suspect this is going on with my child, and the child has expressed a fear of harm or exclusion or something occurring if their parents know, can the teacher elect not to share that information? I get that they don't mandatorily have to share it, but can they elect to say, for example, maybe you should talk to your son, or gee, I'm not clear about that, or whatever it is. They are not required to say, yes, we've had that conversation.
I mean, if it's information they have and they're asked directly, that would be intentionally withholding information from the parent. So I believe that would conflict with the bill. If they believe that there is harm to come to the child, the harm as defined in the abuse and neglect statutes, then they should report it to DCF, and that would absolve them of their obligation to tell the parent.
So that's a little tricky, right? And I get, as you clarified, that your legal standing evaluating the impacts is different
Yes.
than your standing bringing forward the bill.
Yes.
But if a child were to, and I'm really just trying to understand this myself, if a child were to say to a teacher, I'm afraid to tell my parents I think I'm gay, I'm afraid my parents are going to harm me, toss me out of the house, whatever, so I keep this quiet. And the teacher says, thank you for sharing, or whatever it is that they say. There is no imminent threat of harm there, right? There's no imminent threat that would mandate calling DCF, right? But if a parent says, can you tell me if you've had this conversation with my child? And the parent and the teacher says whatever they say, and then there's a threat of harm, if that conversation ever happens, that's different, right? So how does that that's different than a mandatory DCF call.
I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals that occur in your
There
scenario.
sure are, but there's a lot of kids,
And
too.
I understand that there are a lot
Yeah.
of kids and there are a lot of conversations, and I think that that's something that, as the school districts across the state work to implement this, training around these issues in terms of what the school district's comfort level is with how that will be handled with the parent is something that will have to be part of board discussions and board policy. I mean, from my perspective as the bill sponsor, I think that as it's written, if you have that information and you intentionally withhold it from a parent when asked, then you would be violating the statute. That is as clear and simple as I can make that. If you are specifically asked a question and you know the answer to it, then you are purposefully withholding information from a parent about a child.
And if you fear that harm will come to that child, if you answer that question, then we get into this gray area.
Then you get
Right.
into a gray area, I think, on whether or not that is actually imminent harm due to, I mean, I think what's challenging for me, what's been challenging around all the conversations I've had around this bill for the last couple of years is I think there's an expectation from some that difficult conversations can't happen in families without the threat of imminent harm, right? That just because it's difficult, there's no guarantee that every conversation that a child has with their parent is going to be easy. It's actually where children should learn to have difficult conversations, should be with parents, should be in a family situation. I understand that looks different for every child. If there is true harm that the school district employee or the teacher or whoever's interacting with the child believes will come to the child, there's a mechanism to deal with that harm, and that's through the abuse and neglect statutes. That is not, the intent of this bill is that if you have that information, unless you really have knowledge, if you have information about a child, unless you really have knowledge that imminent harm will happen and a parent asks you something, then that should be shared with them. There should not be separate files kept on children outside of, FERPA laws. There should not be confidential documents kept on children in our school districts to the detriment of parents being involved in their life. And so that's really the purpose of the legislation.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you in healthy families. The problem is that not all our families are healthy, and that's where this is a gray area and where we as a district, I think, will have to do considerable work to understand how this gets implemented and how we protect children as well as parents. Because there are, we from other data outside of here, we could assess that there are maybe 20% of our kids are LGBTQ+, just given other broader data. Not all of them come from healthy families, and not all not LGBTQ+ kids come from healthy families. So my concern I don't disagree with you. I, as a parent, would want to know things about my child. I'm fortunate to have a pretty open relationship with my child. But I know that not everybody does. And where we assess whether or not harm will come to the child is very tricky to ask teachers and counselors and administrators to do. So we as a district will have to be very clear on how we protect everybody under these circumstances.
Well, and I think that something that is important in that conversation and consideration is deciding who gets to be the arbiter of what is a healthy family. And I think a healthy family can mean many different things for different people. For some people, it may mean that there's the involvement of religion in their family. For some people, it may mean that there isn't. For some people, a two-parent household is a healthy family. For some people, a single-parent household is a healthy family. And I think that there is some gray area, of course, in the way that any law is implemented, because we're dealing with individuals and human beings and different fact patterns regularly. And that's why the law could be applied differently with a different set of fact patterns. I mean, that's the basis of why I think there is a legal profession. A fact pattern makes a huge difference in the way that a law may be implemented. But at the end of the day, I think the school district and every school district should be very careful about deciding what is a healthy family, and anything outside the scope of a healthy family deserves, the scope of the definition pursuant to each school district, deserves some sort of different treatment under the statute. I think that that's a fine line for government to be walking in terms of what is a healthy family if it does not fall under the abuse and neglect statute, as that is what we know is unhealthy and not permissible.
I think these are going to be conversations we'll have to have in the upcoming year as a district. Because you're right, my definition of a healthy family and yours may be very different. But there are legal definitions that we have to abide by. I don't know that I agree that it is simply a matter of opinion, but we don't need to argue that here. My other only question about this, and I'm not sure if this is a you question or a district question, or we're going to have to discuss it over the course of the year question, which is consequences and monitoring and surveillance, and how do we know when this is happening, and what are the consequences if it is violated, or how do we provide guidance around that? That as a district, I think, is something we're going to have to really grapple with. So I don't know if that's a question or just a statement, but we are not privy to every conversation that every child has with every teacher and administrator around difficult issues. That's part of the point.
Absolutely. We are not, but there is a great deal of training, and I think that is the logical next step for us as a district in partnership, really to look at and create what is going to be the standing operating procedures regarding how we begin to implement. And when I say partnership, that's partnering with other districts. That's partnering with Erin in her office. And we shouldn't mind leading that work across the state on how that's going to be done. So taking this and leading from the front is not going to be easy. But the reality is, if we're willing to engage in this work to create a better space for our students, for our teachers, and for our parents and community, I think it's our responsibility to do so. So to me, this is very, very exciting work that needs to be done. I think as I listened to Erin, I listened to the conversation, a great deal of training and support needs to be provided to parents as well. It's just not, and I can say it from a parent's perspective, I can say it from an alternative education principal, inner city school principal. Parents want what is best for their children. I've never met a parent who doesn't want what's best for their children. But it's very hard and complex to raise a child. I don't care if you're from a regular family home. I think me and my wife are pretty close to being regular, but it's still hard and complex work in supporting and encouraging and developing the kind of relationship parents have with kids. There's nothing wrong with saying, how do you have these difficult conversations? How do you create trust? How do you set barriers? Not necessarily, how do you get your chores done? That is support we can provide to our community in connecting parents with other parents. So I see this as a great opportunity. Will it be easy? Well, the answer to that question is no. But will it allow us to engage in the conversation to create a better community and system? I think the answer is a definite yes there. So the next step for us is to create those committees, beginning that work across the state, here locally, to define what are our procedures, how are we going to implement, and then ensure everyone has a clear understanding as to what is and isn't okay. And as I listen, overwhelmingly what the system has in place right now is solid in terms of reporting and who reports in regards to what particular harm, self or others, in a very, very, very good place. Interpreting, to encourage or coerce information to be kept or not shared isn't something my previous system endorsed or this system. I can't think of one that would says, hey, please, yeah, don't tell. But it is really working through those parameters to clearly define so counselors don't feel concerned, teachers don't feel concerned, but ultimately empowered.
Yeah, what I would just, and then I'll stop. What I don't want to do is get us into a situation, I know we'll address all of this, where a teacher inadvertently or advertently, if that's a word, puts a child in harm's way by disclosure of something. And that's a really tricky thing to ask somebody, in these gray areas of determining what constitutes harm and what constitutes healthy environments. That said, what I'd like to do, or ask you to do, and we can have a board discussion about this, is that when it comes to figuring this out, that we invite kind of a broad spectrum of parents from the community to help us understand and sort through what this looks like for them.
That is that hard, complex work I'm
and I
talking
know
about.
you have a parent advisory group, and
Yep.
I'm sure this will come up in that. But I'd like to make sure that we have a lot of input
Absolutely.
on how we keep everybody safe.
That is
in
the right
this.
path forward.
Yep.
Okay,
That's it.
Ms. Rosario.
Hi, Erin. Thank you for being here. I appreciate everything that you have done with regard to this bill. I'm excited about it. I'm excited for, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, so if my voice sounds a little bit baritone, it's because of that purpose, that reason. I don't even know, low.
Okay.
Low rider. I'm excited for this. I'm glad that we are where we are here, and I'm glad that you're here answering some of these questions. But I want to piggyback off of some of the items that Dr. Schiff was just mentioning. Some of the questions that were raised to you really aren't an issue for you at all. They are probably, and maybe in part, I'm guessing, because Dr. Schiff has not worked at a school district level in a school building, public school, K through 12, maybe that in part is the cause for some of her questions on how we handle things with regard to imminent danger or threat to students. But we already have policies and procedures in place that address student concerns or concerns with regard to students who may be an imminent threat or who may be facing imminent danger. We teachers in the system have this question about crossing that line between revealing information to a parent and causing a problem, a concern for that student in the household all the time. It can happen with grades. If you call up a parent and say, your child hasn't submitted grades or a report or has failed a class this semester, the parent says, I'll take care of it, hangs up the phone. We don't know what happens at the end of that phone call. There could be, for some parents, for some households, serious consequences, unfortunately, unintended consequences for that child, which could end in threat or harm, unfortunately. And it can happen with discipline. If a student is disciplined as a result of something that's happened in the classroom, the same thing can occur. But with regard to what we're discussing today, I'm going to pivot to Dr. Moore to please clarify our policies and procedures with regard to anything in our school district. It might be Mr. Bass, because I see his eyes raising. Anything at the school level that is the process for handling such issues such as that.
So I'll answer from a counselor's perspective, a principal's perspective, guy in charge of student services at one point. When there is a information that comes to a employee at the school in which there is going to be harm to that child or harms to other, that is the obligation to report. Our system fully has training on that each and every single year. We review it. There is an internal process that school sites follow in terms of notification through a school site to the district, so we're all aware as to what's happening. It is the individual who does that reporting. It's not a secondhand report or some information that goes, hey, Mr. Bass, can you call in? I heard this. You can call, but they're going to require, DCF is going to require that individual who received that information firsthand to report. In terms of that being the question, that information is solid in our school system.
And you mentioned all employees. Is that correct?
Go ahead. Yeah. Well, yes, but if you want to expand, Pam, that's fine.
It's on.
We have mandatory training that is required. As a matter of fact, we're getting ready to send that. We have mandatory training that is required for different groups of employees. One of that is the abuse training, mandatory reporting of abuse, as well as bullying, harassment, all of those things. We also have threat assessment training. If you looked at the year at a glance, you'll see all of that training is coming up, as well as the mandatory trainings that are on safe schools. And then we as a district have to train our teachers, administrators, and employees on the processes and procedures for reporting such things. And we're in the process of doing that over the next couple of weeks. So we do have processes and procedures. We're bound by our policies, our board policies to do that.
Awesome.
And if I may just, if
Yes.
I may comment on some of the things that were brought to my attention before I filed this bill 3 years ago. Because I know that the LGBTQ issues have come up, but they certainly were not part of the impetus for the bill. The bill's impetus came from hearing about a risk assessment that was done on a child, and the school knew that the child was suicidal, did not tell the parent, and the child attempted suicide in the parent's care. That is something that should not happen.
Right.
It came to my attention that a child in an elementary school was being sexually harassed by another child in that elementary school. by an older child in the elementary school. DCF wasn't called about the child that was doing the harassing, and the parent wasn't notified about the child that was being harassed. Those are things that just signify to me that there's a fundamental challenge around training, and we need to be focused on, if that's happening, if that elementary school child is sexually harassing other children in the school, there is something tragic that is happening in that child's home that is not being addressed either, and there was no reporting to DCF in that situation. So while I understand some of the concerns around the bill, I think that overwhelmingly, there are a lot of things that happen with regard to our children in school and when they're in the custody and care of the school district, that everybody needs to appreciate that there is a time and place to bring parents into the conversation, and that's as soon as possible with regard to some of these threats that our children face in different aspects of their involvement in the school district.
I couldn't agree with you more. Those things should not occur. When I was working in this school building, even in New York, pretty much the main drive was, when in doubt, called DCF. You are not the investigator, you are just the reporter. You could be anonymous or not, but you are the reporter. It's their job to investigate. And so it's a shame that those incidents that occurred that you were made aware of were not reported. It's shameful. It should never occur. But going back to your the bill and now law right now on parent rights, I think it's important because now it puts us as a district in a place of purposefully creating an effort, a greater effort on our part to not just notify parents of these rights, but to engage them in the process of education for their child. And for me, the more we engage parents, the more we draw parents in, the more we reach out to parents, the more we communicate with them, in my eye, the greater the success of the child. Parent involvement, parent volunteerism, parent information, all of that, even in the bill, I think you mentioned it, you did 1002.23. There is also another one, 1002.22, which is statute, by the way, that has all parent rights and responsibilities and student rights as well with regard to educational choices. But one of those that I thought was interesting and it caught my eye was 1002.23. It is in your plan, in your bill. And it's the Family and School Partnership and Student Achievement Act, where I'm not sure if this is something that we are currently working on, Dr. Moore, or if this is something that we have and we haven't used it or utilized it fully. Each school district shall develop and disseminate a parent guide to successful student achievement consistent with the guidelines of the Department of Education, which addresses what parents need to know about their child's educational process and how parents can help their child to succeed in school. The guide must, and it includes A, B, C, D, E, and some of these other items.
So, through the chair, we do have that document. We do produce it yearly. It was produced last year by Mr. Meyer's office. That responsibility has shifted to Mr. Seymour.
Okay.
A great deal of that body of work ultimately belongs to Ms. Dampier and her team, so it is a joint effort, and we did have a few meetings already in looking at where are the opportunities to embed this updated language into that policy. Our plan is to bring a document to the board that has the Parental Bill of Rights, which is the copy of what was just approved.
Okay.
And then followed by that guide, which includes all of the rights parents have. And it really serves as a one-stop shop for parents to go and navigate on a website. Yeah, it'll be something you print and that you can have, but ultimately it provides links throughout the document, because navigating a school system, whether it's 22 schools or 400 schools, is extremely complex. But this is a document that will hot link you to everything a parent would need to know to navigate such a complex system?
Thank you for that. Erin's law is not just the only thing that's out there, so I encourage you all to take a look.
We have it all.
Because one of the other items that is listed in here is that we, in addition to that parent guide, are supposed to disseminate a checklist of parental actions that can strengthen parental involvement. So I just want to make sure that we're not just, splicing some area, but we're actually being comprehensive. Erin, thank you so much.
I wanted to give Mrs. Berenborg a chance from afar for a follow-up from Ms. Berenborg. Would you like to join the conversation?
Yes, thank you. First of all, from 39 plus years of experience in education, I'm going to tell you there are times where students were worried to tell their parents, and then through counselors and help, they were relieved to have their parents actually find out these tough things that they were worried about. And most times it was a good situation. I've never been aware of one where it wasn't. However, I'm sure that those happen. But I was aware of a time where a parent was withheld information, and unfortunately, like the example that Representative Grahl gave, this child was successful in his suicide attempt. And those parents were not even aware that that child was depressed. So I appreciate this law coming forward, because I think sometimes we don't give parents the due that they should have. And parents should be understanding everything that's going on with their child. So I have a couple of questions, though, if I may ask. First of all, if there'll be counseling opportunities available with agencies for parents that they can be referred to. Is there something like that that exists or that we could connect to? I don't know if Representative Grahl knows about that or if Dr. Moore.
I don't know about anything specific through the school district. I know that sometimes, and I would defer to Dr. Moore, but I know that sometimes, like in our community, those opportunities may be available through the Mental Health Association and in connections that they can give, or through University of Florida. A lot of times they do have a number of their services that are reserved for parents in need who don't have access, or anyone in our community in need who might not have access through another means.
So that might be something that we could put into a guide for parents to have access to. I'm just wondering. Also,
We
Mrs.
currently,
Rosario talked about the guide.
Ms.
And,
Berenborg?
I'd asked Dr. Moore to start outlining the parent guide when the bill was moving towards the governor's desk. And then I asked him if he could meet with Representative Grahl. And I really appreciate, Aaron, that you came in and met with him, because I think it's really important that we have all the questions we can ask, not just from the board, but also from district staff. So I appreciate that you taking the time to do that. But I also think that it was important to wait to make this guide happen until we had this conversation today, so that we're in line with the new law. And that's all I have. I had no other questions. I do know that as educators, and I'm going to reiterate this for Dr. Schiff, anytime a child comes forward and says they're afraid or threatened, we are required to make a call. Required. And so if a child says that in their disclosure, and then that is a concern for a teacher or a staff member. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Jones, you have a follow-up?
Just to follow up, thank you again. I think just from listening to everyone, we want to make sure all of our kids are successful. And as a former principal teacher, every role you could think of, yes, students would talk with you. And if we felt the fear or anything like that, then we had a process to report it, because none of us want any unintended consequences. I just want to make sure as we move forward, whether we have a talking paper or what it is, that our people at the schools feel comfortable, that they thinking, oh, I might make a mistake here, I might make a mistake there, that they feel comfortable. Because this is, we always had to report things that we needed to report. But I just want to make sure all of our staff members, teachers, administrators are comfortable, and that everything works out for everyone.
Absolutely.
I do think with regard to that, and part of the conversation I had with Dr. Moore and the team the other day about the overlap between medical services coming into the school district, because there's a separate section of the bill about healthcare providers and having to have parental consent for any type of services that are provided by a healthcare provider. And so, and Dr. Moore was quick enough to talk about diagnosis and treatment. So if somebody, and I think that that's where, you have to start to look at where the lines are. Where's the line that a history is being taken for the purpose of diagnosis and treatment? If that is happening, a person who's licensed under the healthcare statutes is in fact engaging in their role as a healthcare practitioner versus being a counselor for the purposes of dealing with any of the normal angst that may be going on with a child, academic struggles, just struggles at home. But as soon as you start to move into history, diagnosis, treatment, that's something that a parent would need to give consent for. And I think that, it's through conversations that I think there will be clarity. And a lot of times that doesn't, I know it's frustrating for many people that all of that clarity can't be in statute. Our statute books would be as long as our regulations are triple, quadruple the size. There's just no way to do that all the time. And so I think that it's through conversations, and that's why I really appreciate the open door and the continued conversation as we move towards implementation.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff, you had a follow-up?
I appreciate that we're having this conversation so we can get this kind of clarity. And I completely agree with you on the scenarios that you mentioned. Of course, those should be reported. Of course, we should be aware of them. My concern that I want to make sure that we are attentive to, as Dr. Jones mentioned, is the unintended consequences, because those are often harder to see, right? It's harder to see what we don't anticipate as a result, because that's not the intention we had when putting forward the bill, the policy, the procedure, whatever that is. And is it in the bill or is it elsewhere? What are the consequences should a teacher or other district employee misstep in this? What happens?
So in the bill specifically, the only place that there are even mention of consequences in particular to the employee is in the withhold or attempt to encourage or coerce the withholding of information from a parent. It gives the discretion for there to be disciplinary action. That is the extent of the prescriptive nature of consequences with regard to the employee. Now, with regard to consequences to the school district, I think that's a different liability question. What is the liability if something were to happen to a child because of the failure to disclose, and would that allow a parent to seek any type of redress in the court system? So two totally different types, and that is not specific in the bill. That would likely be based on any damages that would occur and whether or not there was a duty and breach of those breach
Right,
of the duty.
and that the party could prove that they were a direct result of negligence
Yes.
on the part of the district.
That's correct.
Mrs. Barenborg, I appreciate your point about counseling for parents. I think that's a really good point, and I would hope that we include in that resources. I think they're out there if we look for them. And though, well, as several have mentioned, I have not been a teacher in the district, I am actually the only one sitting here who has a kid in the district, who is the parent of a child currently in the district. So my perspective on that may not be as a former teacher or administrator, K-12, but it certainly is as a parent. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Aaron, I just have one question. Age. You have a senior in high school who's 19 years old. If that person was a freshman in college, you're under a whole different set of obligations. Without permission, you cannot pick up the phone and call a parent.
Yes.
So what happens in that rare situation where someone is a year older than normal, and there is concern? I'm thinking about someone who may harm themselves, because I've been in this position as president of a college. What do you do?
I don't know that I have a specific answer for you today, because I think that there's probably already policies with regard to having that child in the school district, that child and the family agree to certain terms by being part of the school district. But I think that's the type of scenario in which there certainly would need to be consideration and training around whether or not, does that 19-year-old have the ability to check him or herself off campus whenever they want, not go to school, not be accountable from a truancy perspective, all of those things. Do they get to make all of their decisions with regard, if they need to take any type of medicine during the day right now, are they able to just walk in and say, I have a prescription for X, Y, and Z from my doctor and I can take it? Or do they still need parental consent for that under the current system? I think that that's something that should certainly be discussed, because I do understand the difference. As soon as they move to a college campus, it's a whole different set of rules.
Yeah, and it's more age-related, and certainly there are rules or regulations in college where, at least in my case, if I basically told the faculty and staff, you're concerned about someone's health, pick up the phone and call the parent. If they sue us, so be it, but I don't want to be responsible for someone, if we are concerned, not taking some sort of action. I'm just wondering whether, in the rare instance where someone is that much older and is covered under different, he or she has different protections because of age. But I guess it's a judgment call, like much of this conversation, in a way, is.
Well, it is, and except for the fact, unless DOE has guidance around how to treat children that are they're not children any longer, students who have reached the age of majority that are in the school district.
Right.
So I would look to DOE for some guidance on how that, if that's not already something that's implemented within the school
Okay.
district.
Thank you. Anybody else? Terrific conversation. Thank you for
Thank
all
you
your
all
hard
very
work.
much.
And
Thank you, and it really is good conversation, and we're looking forward to engaging in the creation of a model that all other systems can ultimately replicate. And speaking about models that all other districts can replicate, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, who will go through his presentation regarding the budget. This is a body of work that we all should be collectively extremely proud in regards to its focus, how it's supporting our school system. We have already spoke about our Fitch rating being upgraded, which is a reflection of the stability that Mr. Fagan has brought to this district. In a later presentation, you're going to see a lot of overlap between our strategic plan and how we're growing that body of work, and how Mr. Fagan is infusing himself throughout the district in order to ensure that we're funding the priorities defined within our strategic plan. And really, over the last year and a half, 2 years, we have laid a foundation to tremendously accelerate student achievement. So with that, Mr. Fagan and his team, thank you in advance of your presentation. But I'll turn it over to Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, to the chair, board members. Before I get started, the young lady sitting behind me, named Kim Coleman, I give a special thanks to her and her team. Without her, I nor this document would be here. So thank you again, Kim, for all your dedication and hard work. Through the last week or so, you've received a couple of documents. One, you received the budget document, the budget book, and then you received an executive summary. And then on Sunday, you received an update, a little email with some supplemental information. You received that supplemental information because DOE released the final certification of the tax roll and the required local effort late Friday night. That document has now been updated and is now part of your agenda item, and so you also have a copy on your desk. So that's where I wanted to start first, because that's the only document that has changed. No, it should be your attached, it should be a separate document on your table. Nope, it should be another one. It looks like that, yes. It should be separately on your desk, Dr. Schiff. Should look something,
Got it, never mind, sorry.
there you go.
Totally in the wrong
Excellent.
documents.
Nancy earlier, yeah.
There you go, or it's online as well. So I just quickly want to go over this new attachment, this amendment that was submitted yesterday. First page is a big old document that says budget summary at the top. This is one of your 3 ads required by the Department of Revenue that we must post. Nothing changed on this document other than the millage rate. Before it was 3.6, now it's 3.5. This is one of the 3 ads tonight that we will approve that will go to the TC POM that will be published on Friday. Then recall, we'll come back on Tuesday the 28th and actually approve the tentative budget and the tentative millage rates. Tonight, we're just approving submission of these ad documents to the TC POM. Next page, on page 2, is a notice of proposed tax increase. This is different from the prior year. Prior year's document said notice of a budget hearing. And the reason is, when you go through the calculation to determine the levy of taxes that we're levying this year compared to the prior year, it actually is an increase. Now, it's not because we increased anything on our side of the house. Our millage rates actually went down. But because of your property taxes went up, you're leveling less millage, but on more value, therefore your taxes will go up naturally. For the homeowner and the taxpayer, required by Department of Revenue, you must notify them of this. So this document is just a required document that we submit in for the newspaper that lets them know that the average homeowner in Indian River will pay approximately 1.4 more in school tax than they did in the prior year. But that's also totally dependent upon their particular circumstances, but on an average. Next page, on page 3, is your last ad. This is your tax for school capital outlay. This is your capital funding source. This is your 1.5 mils based on your tax roll. It'll bring in approximately $31 million. Standard ad, it lists all of our normal reimbursements, all of our projects that we spend our capital dollars on to let the taxpayer know how we spend our capital dollars. On page 5 is what we call resolution number 2201. This is a document the chair will sign. This is the actual levying of the actual millage rates to generate the revenue source that the district will use to operate next year's operating budget. It confirms the rates that were confirmed by DOE. As you see, there's $131 million. And the little line below that says exceeds the rollback rate by 1.43%. This is an indication to the homeowners that your average tax rate might go up by about 1.5% compared to the prior year. Compared to last year, we're generating $131 million. Last year, you generated $127 million. So approximately $4 million more, or 4%. Again, this is strictly because the tax roll went up. We didn't do anything any different. Next page, on page 6, resolution number 2202. This is a document where we simply confirm to the tax assessors and Department of Education the total budget for next year. This is the tentative numbers. See that in the 4th paragraph, approximately $323 million. Next page, 7 of 8. This is an estimate of very generic example of how we try and disclose the impact to the homeowner on their taxes for the school tax rate. So you see at the very top, your tax rate went from $20.8 billion to $21.9 billion, so you had about an increase of $1.1 billion in taxable values. That's about 5.3%. The next box on line 2, your required local effort actually went down. Again, that is dictated by the Department of Education. Failure to levy that exact rate subject the district to not receive state funding in the amount of about $47 million. This is the other half of the funding for all districts. You levy locally, and then you get the money from the state. So the actual rate went down 2%. Property values went up. So because of that, your average homeowner will somewhere pay between 1% and maybe 5%. If they had a huge increase in their property values, they're naturally going to pay more. Okay. Last page is just a historical chart that shows the taxable values for the district since 2000. As you can see, it has a tendency to move around quite a bit. Any questions on those documents? All right, I want to move next to the executive summary, which is the same document you received in an email, and also it's on the agenda. And just want to go over some quick highlights and then turn it over to any other questions. So first off, you do have a balanced budget. It is what you always want to make sure you have. Some major changes from the prior year is your FTE is up approximately 313 FTE. Last year, our reported FTE was 17.1, so that's a decrease of about 400,000 from our projection. But because of COVID, DOE held us harmless, so they supplemented us. There was no break in funding for a year. However, that 17.1 became the baseline for which they wanted to project this year's FTE. We went back and convinced them that our FTE will go up at least 300 to get us to approximately 17.4. That argument generated an additional $1.4 million in funding for us. If not, we would have had to find $1.4 million. Overall, your funding for the district basically netted in a net difference from the prior year of $430,000 less. Makes primarily of two components. You have discretionary funding and categorical. Discretionary funding is things like transportation, base school allocation, things like that that you can move around. The other part is categorical. That's like your class size, mental health funding, reading funds, et cetera. Those are very restricted. You can only spend on certain purposes. Our discretionary funding went up $420,000. That's why? Because you had an increase in FTE, you had an increase in your base school allocation. So you got more money simply generating more children. Categorical actually went down $830,000. This is because the legislation decided to change the funding for class size. They reduced the class size funding for pre-K students down 24%. They increased the funding for 4th and 8th and 9th and 12th by 6%. For us, that meant a net hit negative number of $1.4 million. Information coming out of Tallahassee has indicated the reason why they did this is they made a statement that pre-K to 3 had been overfunded for several years. That was the end of their conversation. That's the only thing I can tell you. That's what came out of Tallahassee. And this was the year they decided to make the correction. Put all that together, and we were difference between last year and this year's funding about $430,000. More is that bad, we'll be able to make it up between a little bit of supplemental funds from ESSERS, plus we ended the year with a higher beginning fund balance, so it won't be a material impact for this year. What is interesting, though, is if the state had left us alone and funded us at the same amount as our state funding from last year, and gave us the same amount this year, and give us the benefit of our increase in our property values, you would have seen an increase in over $5 million in funding. But because of the way they do the formula, we actually took a $400,000 hit. I mentioned before the taxable values increased about $1 billion. That's what gave you that additional funding through your required local effort in your capital funds. Strategic plan. This year we aligned the strategic plan with the budget. Basically, the strategic plan's main focus, every plan, every facility within the district has a main purpose. Every facility, every school, every division, every personnel within that operation has a primary focus. That primary focus drives one or more of the strategic plan initiatives. So in an attempt to align the budget with that strategic plan at a very high level, not getting too granular, we broke the budget into the 5 categories, and on page 2 of the executive summary, you'll show how we allocated $272 million. This is our first attempt, last year we did not have this, to align the strategic plan with the budget. We're going to go one step further for the final budget, and what we're going to do is we're going to take each of the targets that are listed in the strategic plan, and we're going to give a description of where that funding is to support that specific target. So if there's 4 targets under strategic for academic success, what are they? What's the funding strip to fund those? Now, of course, that won't total $272 million. Some of those, because those are just 4 components of the strategic plan that we've identified. But we will modify that for the final budget and show that as a narrative. So you'll be able to tie the strategic plan funding for each of those targets back to somewhere and be able to get, see where the funding is coming from. ESSER, I mentioned that a couple times. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Relief Emergency Funding. Budget highlights. You ended the year with $22 million fund balance. That's compared to $16 million in the prior year. So that's going from 10% to 14%. That is a direct result of ESSER. Remember last year when I came to you and I mentioned we got the $3 million and then we got 13 and we got an advance funding. So we moved expenditures into that second $6 million. So I basically moved expenditures from general fund into ESSER. And when I do that, my general funds go down, fund balance goes up. And we'll slowly begin to burn that fund balance off over the next couple of years. Major changes. Also for the year, we have budgeted as required by the board policy. You have a 5% budgeted ending fund balance for 21-22. That 5% equates to $7.6 million. Some changes or some highlights from the budget is one, you added an elementary and secondary school counselor through the staff allocation model. We had various positions in the SAM, staff allocation model, ESOL teachers, ESE teachers, and pre-K self-care aides. We implemented the 8-period day at your secondary schools. We added ESE teachers at 3 secondary schools and added a success coach to the alternative school. Remember, we have ESSERs of 3 pockets. $3.3 million was last year, $13 million for this year, of which we've already pulled down 6. Information from DOE says that application process should be forthcoming. When they say forthcoming, that could be 3 days or 3 months. As soon as that's released, we will do what we can as fast as possible to draw down that cash as fast as possible. And then ESSER 3 is the estimated $30 million. My understanding that is still confirmed and coming, just don't have any information on it. All your school positions, all school and division positions have been fully funded, benefits and salaries. Everything is fully loaded. Slight increase in FRS this year, went up a little bit less than 1%. That's going to cost us about $600,000. And of course, we increased the healthcare contribution about 3%. That'll cost us about $300,000. Quick updates on the budget overall. General fund, you increased about $5 million to $182 million. Basically, that's because you increased your fund balance because of ESSER. Basically, no other real change in your general fund budget. Keep in mind your general fund, 75 to 80% of that is strictly salaries and benefits. Everything else is left. 25% or so is left to cover all your other dental costs. Okay, that's pretty much all I wanted to highlight. I'd like to pause now and ask any questions.
I have a question. And I think the critical thing, besides the obvious, is aligning, make sure that the strategic plan, that we can afford to do what we say we're going to do. And it's no small feat to be able to integrate numbers into words so that they support one another. My question, in looking at the various categories, obviously academics is the big one. Equity, culture, and climate, $27 million, and that's on the last page in the lower right-hand corner.
Yes, sir.
In the, how many pages? 400 pages?
Yes, sir.
I had a hard time finding the detail behind what those words, aligning the numbers with the words. And I don't want to get into a long detail, but is there some place in these 400 words, because I couldn't find it, where there's a direct correlation between the strategic plan and the cumulative numbers that have been signed to each of these 5 pillars?
There is, to the chair, that 17 million consists of all your special revenue funds. So that's your IDA, your entitlements, your entitlement money. That number is, I see your point and I see your question. We can break that out for you. It's not as easily accessible, but I can do that for the final, yes.
It would be, I think it would be helpful because it's like anything else. You put these big groupings, there's probably, a little more detail, line item detail, not going crazy, but just into the 4 or 5 or 6 things that comprise that 27. Now you talk about Title I. Obviously, that's a big chunk of that 20. I don't know whether it's a big chunk, but it's a substantial chunk of that 27 million. I just think that would at least help me understand exactly, when you use these words, what that means. I'm just not that familiar.
I guess.
But I know the word equity is one of those words that people
Gotcha.
can get concerned or excited about, depending on,
Do you by chance have your budget book handy with you right there?
oh, I sleep with this stuff. Yeah.
Can you turn?
First of all, I haven't had to go to the gym since this showed up in the mail, because I just sort of lifted 2 or 3 times.
Can you turn to page 165 of 377?
I'm here.
Down at the bottom, you see 17,740,000.
Yep.
That's the same number that's on the strat plan. So it's those revenue sources are all your federal funds.
So, but in the strategic plan target budget, you've got 27 million.
Oh, I'm just picking up that 17 million is the
Okay.
biggest piece of that. So yes, each of those individual services would then be, I'd have to take you to each one of these individual sheets, such as for ESE services. Okay.
So that's a big, I know you've made a substantial investment in ESC services, which
Correct.
my understanding, I've gotten a lot of feedback in the
Correct.
short time I've been involved. That was an area that needed to be addressed.
So to continue down this path, if you go to page 110, you see ESE Services Facility 9002. Go to the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth column, you'll see 6,471,000. That'll tie back to the 6,471,000 on that chart.
I got it.
And just if I can add to that, because all of these are color-coded, right? So it's fairly easy
Yes.
visually to track each
Yes.
expense to each area
Yeah,
here. I
if-
just want to make sure that's
Yeah,
pointed out.
each of the facilities is color-coded, which will then tie back to this.
Maybe I'm colorblind.
So I didn't plan for that, sir.
No, that would have made it a lot easier if you told me this. Why didn't you tell me
Because
that?
I didn't want to butt in. I wanted to let you say what you had to say. But for equity, climate, and culture, you'll notice in the budget book,
I see.
everything is that color green, et cetera, et cetera.
I get it. You know how much time I spent trying to find the pages that, if I put them all together, would add up to these
See,
numbers?
now, if you were just allowed to call me, we could have.
We will refine that for the final.
But you know, if there was a way, and, you know, in the future, if there's, it's like anything else. To find the pages, maybe that's not that big a deal, but if these pages, for example, were organized, or a second set, were organized in a way by color, it'd be a lot easier for us that don't live with these numbers every day, and I'm speaking, and I live with numbers, but not for a school district of 323 million. It would be a lot easier to really have a good understanding of what we're investing in, the
Right.
specificity under each of the pillars of the strategic.
For each one of these, we can put behind it each color independently and then reference
That's
the
for the
page.
future, not, it would, I think it would really, I
Okay.
think it would.
We can
be
do that.
good. For people that aren't used to these numbers, I think it would be a lot easier to follow. But so, thank you. Dr. Schiff, thank you. Mr. Sorry.
Mr. Fagan, thank you. It's all him, not me.
Right back to Kim. Teamwork, that's what teamwork is all about, right? Thank you, Mr. Fagan and Kim, and your entire team for putting this together. One of the things that is not new to my requests with regard to the budget is aligning it to the strategic plan. As you well know, Mr. Fagan, in that the strategic plan should drive the budget. The budget shouldn't drive the strategic plan. The strategic plan should drive every decision that we make in our school district and not the other way around. For years, we were doing it the other way around. This year, what you said that you were going to include for the final budget that we do not see here might answer some of the question that you're referring to with regard to kind of seeing some of those smaller details of where it falls within our strategic plan. Because Mr. Fagan and I, and even Dr. Moore, we've had this conversation about, and I spent days trying to figure out what is missing. I still couldn't figure out what is missing, where when I open this as a novice, you know, I want to be able to see the strategic plan within it. I don't want to see the categories. I want to see the driving force behind it. And what we've discussed, what is to come for the September final, maybe you can get it to us before the final so we can have time to digest it. It is, if you look at the strategic plan has smaller, and later on, Dr. Moore is going to present the new strategic plan with new strategies and goals for the new upcoming year. But regardless, even for the current one, if you look at the strategic plan, for each of the goal areas, there are smaller targets that should have been accomplished or should be accomplished within the next full year, 2021 to 2022. And those small targets are what should be within the strategic plan. That's the part that we're missing, the connect, and that's what Mr. Fagan is going to provide for us. And that essentially what that is saying is for our strategic plan, strategy 1.1 will be covered in wherever, I don't even know where, I'm not looking at it right now, but it will be covered within one of the sections, within some of those color-coded areas. So if you look at this pie chart, it has a, Mr. Fagan, pop in anytime I say something wrong, okay? It has a pretty global picture of all of our budget, right? And it has academic success, obviously we see those, equity, culture, climate, community engagement, talent. But when you look at those smaller areas underneath for each one of those, like talent development and support, number 7,000, healthcare fund, $23 million. Healthcare fund is not in our strategic plan. It's not written in there. So some of these areas that are not included in our strategic plan are kind of like the disconnect for me, which is what Mr. Fagan is going to provide for us. So Mr. Barefoot, I'm not sure if that kind of helps. Does that make sense? When we receive the new narrative of the strategic plan strategy goals within this proposed budget, we will better be able to see the alignment of the strategic plan and this proposed budget. Did I say that right?
Correct. Through the chair, if I can
Correct.
add.
Thank you.
When the request came for a global view of how the strategic plan and the budget tie together, from my seat, I look at it and say, oh, I got 5 target areas and I got $300 million. Globally, everybody supports the strategic plan. Now, there may be 5 targets within my area, but that target does not, those targets will not require all my resources. No more different than Kristen may have 3 targets. She's also got 49 other things she has to do that are not in the strat plan, but are part of her budget.
Right.
So I grouped everybody together. All those items, Kristen is responsible for the targets in the strat plan and also the other 49 that the superintendent's going to say, where are you on these? Okay. But that's just part of her normal job. So in my mind, I took the total budget and said, I got to be able to put the pieces where they go to seem to make logical sense that support something within the strategic plan. It may not be a target, but overall it helps with the concept of what is in the strategic plan. So if the concept for Mr. Bass's area is to recruit and retain high qualified staff, well, one of the things that's going to help retain them is a decent healthcare plan. So I threw that into that pot because I said, well, it doesn't belong in finance. I mean, it could, but it could belong in physical, but let's give that over here because that indirectly supports his need to hire and recruit staff. It's not under him, but it supports that function. Is it a target? Kind of, sort of, but not directly tied to the healthcare plan. So that was my concept of what. After talking to Ms. Rosario, okay, we can take this is a good base, this is good, and we can drill down a little bit based on the strategic plan.
And I think just to reinforce what Mr. Fagan just said, the power of that process is actually through that thinking. Allowing cabinet to go through all of their areas of responsibility, which is a great starting point for us as a leadership team to evaluate, I am responsible for A, B, C, or D. Where is it impacting our strategic plan at such a high level? And as you recall, we made significant, we realized a 5% cost savings in our discretionary spending, just going through this process over the year, looking at it from a high level in regards to, is this recruiting and retention or this incentive for pay, whatever the case may be, is it actually aligning to our specific priorities? And when we get into the district strategic plan, and I don't want to brag on Mr. Fagan, but we have created a process where Mr. Fagan is in every room. And sometimes it's Kim that's in the room listening to Dr. Jacobs or Ms. Dampier or any one of the leadership teams talking about our evaluation of what we're doing. All of the new initiatives that we rolled out, you're going to hear into our strategic plan. It's not a coincidence. It is us defining our priorities. And Mr. Fagan constantly saying, got it, and then creating a budget to support the ongoing thinking of what we're presenting. And not to push to the strategic plan conversation, but I don't know, and I said it when we presented this plan, a typical 5-year plan has strategies that last 5 years. They have targets that last 5 years. Mr. Meyer has accomplished all of his targets areas in focus, his annual targets in focus area 1. It has completely changed them. Used year 1 as foundational initiatives to move this work. Mr. Fagan in his focus area, same level of thinking. He had 6, now he's down to 4 because 2 became foundational for setting this work up. So we also have 6 targets, now I'm getting into my presentation, 6 targets that are 4 years out. The team made the decision, and this would be mostly in Ms. Maddox's area, engaging parents into the portal, into focus. We're moving that goal, which was 84, because last year it was in the 20s, 30s. We're basically already there. So we're going to push it out 4 years out. So it is one of the most fluid strategic plans that I have ever seen. And what is so natural about it is Mr. Fagan's presence in interpreting and listening and having an understanding in terms of, okay, these people are dreaming up these kinds of things that they want to do. The funding already just becomes there, and we see those shifts. So it's a very, very interesting, organic process that really, in my mind, models what continuous improvement is. And I know, Ms. Rosario, you had that conversation with Mr. Fagan, and I think it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. And to be quite honest, it's not really how I've looked at it, because I know it's naturally happening. So it will be another interesting exercise for us to go back and say, you know, if you look at Mr. Meyer's, you know, create and implement an enhanced system and structure for school improvement planning and monitoring, that's SIP. That's our new school improvement plan that we are rocking and rolling across the street, rolling out for each of our leadership teams. Like 300-400 people over there just digging into that new process. That's a big investment. And that big investment is going to drive school site continuous improvement like we've never seen before. And it's birthed in this annual strategy. So it's very exciting to see how this ties together, and equally exciting to see how this strategic plan is not sitting on a shelf. It's not 4 years away. It is our annual targets, our annual strategies that we're updating on a yearly basis to move this work forward. Mr. Fagan, I am sorry for...
But you know, it's unusual. It's unusual to think of call this a government entity. In the corporate world, this is exactly what happens. First of all, a strategic plan longer than 3 years is, you may as well forget it, because the world's changing so fast, the world in which you live, technology being a primary driver of that change. So constantly updating the out years, which is what you're saying, is critical. And anticipating what you're going to need financially to be able to accomplish those goals, so that what you allocate initially, you know, you've got to think, if it's going to take 4 years and maybe you get there in 2, but if it's going to take 4 years to get from where we are to where we want to be, you want to make sure that you don't run out of money along the way. And so there's a real art to this. I mean, it's right out of the business school textbooks in terms of strategic planning, how you go about it. But I would compliment you on that thought process, because otherwise you're going to find yourself putting money behind what today you think is strategically important that tomorrow is irrelevant, and you're not anticipating, thinking ahead what could happen as something evolves, let's say in distance learning, just to use that as a catch-all, virtual learning, whatever words you want to use. It's an interesting exercise, but I think that what you've described here, as you say, it's a dynamic process, and it should be, and it's unusual to see this in municipal government.
Absolutely.
So congratulations
Thank you
to
for
you
saying
guys for the way you're thinking about all this.
And I just want to add to that, because Dr. Moore, there might be areas on the strategic plan in terms of the strategies that you may not need a funding source for it. if you're posting something on Facebook for the purpose of, notifying parents that, look on Focus for XYZ, that's not gonna cost anything to do. So some of those strategies may not have a funding source, but the fact that we're really looking at those areas to be aligned with our budget and vice versa, it's very intentional when we do that. It actually creates purpose for the budget. It actually creates purpose for our strategic plan for both to work hand in hand to reach its goal.
You're right, and in some ways, it has, even in this process, it results in conflict, where we're looking at priorities.
It should.
That's the whole thing.
Politely speaking to semantics about why is this not getting done? This is a priority.
Right.
Well, because this other thing is taking up our time. It's not a priority, but it's dominating our time because it's not important, but it's pressing.
Right.
So it really allows us to kind of go back to our core values also in the strategic plan and saying, are we aligned to our values? So, and I think as we do this exercise aligned to each of the strategies, it will allow staff to, as they so eloquently do, push back on me in some ways of I need more resources, or, we're engaging in conversations or dialogue or dominating our time for things that are not going to move this work forward. So I think it is the process and the creation of this budget, as well as the strategic plan, and then continuing to move it into the school year is very, very dynamic, exciting work.
I just have one more question. Follow-up. For those who don't know, we've had this conversation multiple times, but for those who are unfamiliar, for the community who are listening, can you please explain, Mr. Fagan or Dr. Moore, the SAM, the staff allocation model, why it's so, why is it within our plan, within our budget, because there is a full narrative on page 20 for the staff allocation model, why we changed from what we were doing last year to this, and its importance, so that we can clarify, obviously, and justify what it.
Through the chair, the school allocation model wasn't in existence prior to me arriving. It ensures that the dollars follow the students. And I'll give you a perfect example as to why it's important. Just today, when Mr. Fagan should be prepping for his presentation, he's emailing principals regarding the number of students that are future to show up to school on day one. We went through a process prior to the exit of last school year where we gave principals their budgets, their allocations based on SAM. If those numbers fluctuate over the summer, they do, and you pick up 2 teachers, we need to generate those 2 teachers. But if the enrollment for the entire system isn't going up, this district just can't say, well, here's 2 more teachers, where are they coming from? So we have a lot of movement as a result of choice. So we're seeing more movement than our system is typically used to experiencing. But we're not generating more students. So going through the process of saying, let's make sure we are allocating positions based on need, and we're constantly adjusting based on that enrollment. So a school that had 25 teachers, but only had enough students for generating 22 students, we would then work with that school to say, okay, we need to move that allocation, that resource, that human capital, to where it ultimately goes. And it also ensures that there's appropriate number of support staff based on the number of students. No one could explain to me why Vero Beach had more counselors than Sebastian River. Why X middle school have less than or more than the other? It's based on enrollment. So setting those cap ensures as a system that we're allocating where we have the students and we're being fiscally responsible. And a cost savings is saying, let's move teacher where kids are and let's empower principals to control your numbers. That's choice. I don't want to lose 2 teachers. I'm going to go out and recruit them. I can recruit kids. I can keep them. And what's going to get kids to go to my school? The absolute best programs and the absolute best teachers. And it's been very, very exciting to watch principals recruit the best teachers over the course of the summer. So we're seeing the effects of the foundational changes. Choice, we're seeing those changes. Transportation being available, we're seeing those changes. The school-based allocation model, we're seeing those changes. And once again, I'm running on, sorry.
So along the change line, if school starts August 10th, final budget's approved, what is it, September 9th? Something like that?
Through the chair, yes, sir.
So you're, I mean, unless like in the world of colleges and universities, you can set a budget in May for the July 1 fiscal year, but your real budget is when you adjust it based on who shows up.
Correct. August
And
20.
and you've got exactly the same challenges here, except that you have to have the ability to move money around, resources around, because you're talking about, what, 75% of your expenses are people.
Through the chair, on August 23rd, we'll be doing an actual 10-day count. This is where the schools will report back what students they have and where they are and what grade they're in. We'll rerun SAM, find out where the allocation was. Because you may have a school who maybe decreased in 4th, 5th, and increased in pre to 3. Well, that's a lower ratio. So they may gain a teacher there, but you may have the opposite. They may move, or they don't have as many kids as they projected. Well, then we'll look at them, and then you have to give up a teacher or gain a teacher. But we'll do that actually on the 10-day count.
So do you move a teacher from one elementary school to another?
If they didn't earn it, yes, sir.
And then how's that decision, not that I want to get into the weeds, but how's that decision made as to which one? Is that the principal's decision, or is there some?
So Mr. Meyer
Process.
will work with them. Typically, you look at what upholds class size. So you may have 3, kindergartens with, 12 students in them each. If you're able to combine them, those numbers don't actually work out. But where can you meet class size and pull the teachers where you have 3 or 4 small classes? And that typically, Mr. Meyer leads that work through what he calls master schedule reviews. It's the constant looking at class size, making sure we are as close to class size as humanly possible without going out within our core, and then providing opportunities to maximize our electives. And through the 8-period day, you'll see there is an additional allocation to support that 8-period day. But what it provides is doubles the amount of planning time for teachers, and we cannot, if we don't provide them that time, they can't deliver on what we want them to deliver on. And it enhances the opportunity for additional courses, electives. We had a program for providing partnership with our homeschool families, and some of the electives that are being offered for the very, very first time are coming about because of the 8-period day. Well, at the same time, no student has to, we don't have to pull a student away because he was impacted or she was impacted because of COVID or the instructional model or the countless quarantines that they were exposed to and they academically lost. They can have that enrichment course as well as have that remediation course.
Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Just a few comments and a few questions. Thank you for saying that our strategic plan needs to be fluid. Any plan, sometimes we'll accomplish some things, sometimes we won't through the next couple of years, but any good plan is fluid. And Mr. Fagan, you gave a great example of what is direct under our 5 areas and what is indirect. Everything just doesn't fit perfectly, but you could say, well, that will help the academic area, so that's where we will put it. And that's something I think we need to continue to do. Dr. Moore, I know you said that the principals are getting a little bit more involved in the budget like they used to, and 75 to 80% is allocation for the most part. But how's that going as far as the training? Because I truly believe that the principals at their schools know what they need.
Through the chair, and you could speak firsthand about that. And I think some of the impact that Mr. Fagan and team have had on cabinet and senior level staff this year, we want to push that level of thinking and decision making down to school sites. So it is a twofold approach. We're really building the bench, and our principals, it's a different day from when you were a principal. We are trying to maximize every dollar. And I think through Mr. Fagan and team's support, principals can do significantly more with less when they have a prioritized funding, or their funding initiatives based on priorities. So just really looking at, well, and the example I always use, because it's the first example that came to my mind, well, you're buying these magazines. How do we use these magazines? You're renewing them every single year. Is that the best use of that dollar to improve academic performance for kids? Are they being read? Justify to me that that expense is in the best interest of children. And then it forces the ongoing conversation, the conversations that we spend hours having as a cabinet at school sites. And that's where we want those conversations to take place.
Thank you. Along that line, we always, on the 10-day count, we kind of look at where we are. If a principal needs to lose a teacher, can they use their discretionary to buy that teacher? That's what if we felt that was a priority.
Through the chair, generally not, because discretionary funding should be used for discretionary fundings. Now, extra hours, yes, but generally not for a whole position, because in theory, if you didn't generate it through FTE, you don't get to buy it back.
Okay.
Because now you're defeating the purpose of the SAM.
Okay.
Now, if you at 10-day count, you're down,
Right.
but 3 months later, you get a massive wave coming back in, you come back knocking on the door, then of course we'll give you the position back.
And it's always a point, you know, whether you lose a teacher or gain a teacher at that time, it's tough because schedules have to change. But we used to be able to do that and then we'd run a low discretionary because we thought it was most important to have that position, but that's okay. I continue to look at ESSER, and we're in year 2, correct?
Through the
We'll go
chair,
through
yes,
year
ma'am.
3. And luckily, our millage passed, so we're kind of good there for a few years. And when ESSER goes away, do we have any kind of plan as to what we will then fund that?
Through the chair, the primary focus for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 has not been defined yet. So we can't really talk too much about that because you can use it for the same things you used ESSER 1 and 2 for, but a lot of it also is for facilities construction, air circulation, and et cetera.
Right.
The thought process for ESSER 1 and 2 is I can shift expenses from general into ESSER, move it into general fund, and then you slowly burn that money out over time. Anything that was moved out of general fund for ESSER 2 out of general into ESSER, so I moved expenditures. That's what caused the increase in the fund balance. For 21-22, those items are back in general fund. So I have fully funded them. So you're not going to have that funding cliff where you get to the end and go, ooh, I need $5 million to fund everything. No, they're already back in the budget. Now, if I get another wave of ESSER, then I move the expenditures, and all I do is just increase the fund balance a little bit higher, and then over the course of a couple of years, you will burn that down. The thought process is for that money is going to be used to help Mr. Meyer buy all of the textbooks he wants to buy, and also for our technology refresh. Those are one-time items. Therefore, you want to buy them on a cycle and also use some of that money to seed technology and seed the textbook fund. So when the funding from the state is only $1 million, but we need $2 million to buy the textbook, we've already planted that money in that, so we have funded it through the next 3 to 5 years.
Understood. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Mr. Fagan does like to brag on himself. I think it's my responsibility to do so. So what we have been allowed to do is create that long-term funding renewal where it didn't exist before. So some of the technology in classrooms that students as adults will be dependent upon was already outdated. So we're now on refresh cycles to ensure that we're funding over the course of time. So when that big purchase or that big ticket item comes up, we've already done that thinking. We've already done it for high school.
Yes.
Doing it for middle school,
Yes.
then elementary, and then teachers are also into that loop. So we're keeping that technology current. So it's not this reactionary thing where Mr. McDonald's saying, I don't have, my technology's outdated. We're playing for it. So allowing us to bring or have that level of thinking already in place. And in terms of having the conversations regarding, look at enrollment. We know, based on our master plan, we have capacity issues going into 9, 12, 4 and 5 years down the road. What can we do to shift or modify or recreate some of those spaces, which is ongoing conversations that we need to have. And then how do we use some of those funds to offset that experience for our 9, 12 students?
And also, just got a couple more. I keep seeing this, and this is a highlight of this entire book. We're going to be debt-free in 10 years.
To the chair, yes, ma'am, as long as you don't issue any more.
As long as
As
what?
long as you don't issue any more,
As long as we don't issue what?
any more debt.
Oh,
All right, and then I was really excited to see, because this has been a little bee in my bonnet with the Extended Day Fund, giving the allocation to the schools and the teachers to see what they need and have that a little bit more focused, because that's a large fund balance in that area. I saw that, and you mentioned this already, the 21-22, the FEFP calculations is down 2%. Do you agree with that?
For our FTE calculation, slightly, because we were at 17.5 in
Right.
last year COVID. Well, we came in at 17.1. We were able to argue and get them back up to 17.4. So we're about 100 less than what we were last year, but based on the projection and this overall state enrollment,
Yes.
okay, we felt pretty comfortable that that was a decent. Now,
Okay.
if we do get the students in the fall count, then we can see.
But we are growing as a community, which is a great
Right,
deal
we
of the
are.
confusion even I have.
I
You
know,
you knock down some woods on the road, and there's a whole community going up. But Ms. Berenborg had actually got me a meeting with an individual, and his name escapes me, but he's the city's urban planner. Folks who are moving into our area, who are moving in droves, don't have children.
Right.
That's exactly
And
right.
I saw our Title I schools, I think we have 14 now, and I talked to Mr. Fagan about that a little bit yesterday, because some of the expenses are rolling over, and just wanted to make sure the principals had the right to see what they needed. I think they go through Mr. Meyer on that, but that's so important for our Title I schools. And this is kind of with the budget, but with COVID and everything last year, I think most principals shared that they were short on subs almost every day. So is there anything we've done as far as planning and helping our schools with that? Because that was a challenge for schools.
Through the chair, the answer is yes, and that is to be fully staffed when school starts. And Mr. Bass cannot go on vacation until he makes sure we are fully staffed. That is the first answer to that question. If you look at your agenda, you're always seeing subs come in, but we want to problem solve. We want to get to the root cause. What is the root cause? Teachers being out, which, passed absolutely no judgment during the
not
midst of
last year,
COVID. But as we get back to a regular school year, we really want to make sure we have teachers in school. They feel valued, they feel respected, and we're minimizing our own open positions that cause us to have those subs that we don't need. But it still is, that's a hard one.
Thank you, Mr. Fagan and Kim and everybody in finance. You always answer the questions. Thank you.
I want to give Mrs. Berenborg an opportunity from afar to weigh in on this conversation. Any
Thank you.
comments, questions?
Thank you. Yes, that was Phil Mattson who we met with, who is the county planner for growth. And I think it was important that we did speak with him, and that might be a good person to bring to the whole board to have those conversations when we start talking about future land use. Thank you for mentioning that. So I have a couple of questions and some statements, obviously. First of all, thank you, Mr. Fagan, Kim, and your whole staff. This is a huge undertaking, I know, and I appreciate the color coding. It's important that everything is aligned to strategic plan. I know sometimes you're talking, like, I think the health plan was brought up as an example. I think it's important that we do know exactly where the dollars are intended to use for that strategic plan, so the strategic plan is actually running all the money. I think it's important also that when principals are ordering things for their school, when they're justifying that purchase, they are justifying exactly what part of the strategic plan that purchase is for. So I think it's great that we're moving in that direction. Could you please, Mr. Fagan, explain ESSER 3, that $30 million that we supposedly will hopefully see someday? What do you know about it?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. Let me turn to my little summary sheet. Okay, so you said ESSER 3, correct?
Yes.
All right, ESSER 3 is estimated for $30 million. The district could get approximately 26, charter schools ballpark about $4 million. The allowable expenditures that we understand for ESSER 3 are very similar to ESSER 1 and 2, so anything that the school district needs in order to run its main operations is fine. We also want to use it to address learning losses, purchases of technology, mental health services, improve indoor air quality in our buildings, can be used for summer learning, and the catch-all is anything else that we need to use those funds for. The key item, though, it is one-time money. Now, the funds do run from March of '21 to September of '24, so we have a few years in which to burn the money. So if we decide to use it for something in a facility such as air circulation or anything like that, we have time to implement, design, and install. The key item, though, it is one-time money, so you don't want to use it for reoccurring expenditures unless you use it for reoccurring expenditures, but immediately put those right back in your budget, so you don't have a funding cliff. To the day right now, that's all we currently know about ESSER 3. My understanding is the paperwork is in force in DOE due to come out, but I don't know when yet.
Okay. Under allocations, and thank you for answering several of my questions about allocations this past week, but two things came up as I was listening to the conversation. The K-3 overfunding, you said there was a correction done. Do you know when they started that overfunding? Because I know that class size reduction for K-3 happened, well, K-2 happened a while ago. So why did they decide that that needed a correction?
Through the chair, I'm sorry I cannot answer that question because it was not explained that way. It was simply a
I'm sure.
statement that was made during session that they believed that K-3 had been funded over many years. My understanding, they did not supply any analysis as to why or how they came to that conclusion.
Okay, so can Title I schools then use the funds? I know we talked about discretionary. I know Dr. Jones brought that up, and having been a Title I principal, I know that when I wanted to purchase, in quotation marks, a person to maybe help out with extra hands, I know our Title I schools have reading and math coaches, but I'm thinking beyond that, are they able to use that funding for Title to purchase a person?
Through the chair, their Title I allocation they get. Within that Title I allocation, the guidelines already got to buy a reading coach and a math coach. Anything left over is their discretion to hire whatever they need. Now, if for some reason they have used their full SAM allocation, they've used their full allocation of Title I, and they still come up short that I need something for some particular program or reason, then they would come to us and say, okay, this is why I need it. It would be reviewed by cabinet, and they would get that additional position if justified. So the reduction in the class size funding did not hurt the schools by reducing their funding. What drives their allocation is what do they need based on the number of students. Then we find the funding to support that.
Okay, so there is that opportunity then, because I did take advantage of that when I was a Title I principal, and I just want to make sure that avenue is still there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. And then again, Dr. Jones, thank you for bringing up extended day money. I think it's important that it goes back to the schools because that is a fund that has been increasing. And so I think it's important that we throw it right back to the schools where it was, where the money came from. Please explain, though, the IT funding under communications in the strategic plan. Remember, I talked about the fact I was going to bring that up today.
All right, the concept there again is very similar to when we use the healthcare fund to put under talent and development. Technology, one of technology's main role, this is their operating money, not their capital money. This is what they use to buy and support any kind of platforms and access and training that principals, teachers, staff, students, parents need to be engaging with their students, with their students and the teacher to make sure everything works technology-wise. So when they click the button, it works. So the concept was here, I could put it under fiscal responsibility, but I'm trying to say I spend a lot of technology dollars to make sure when the student and the teachers click on that button that it works. So I'm trying to engage that audience. That was that concept.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because that's a huge number sitting there, and I wanted to make sure people understood why it was there. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, Ms. Massaro, you?
Yeah, it may not even have to do with this particular budget, but there was a question with regard to a particular position, buying a teacher or something. Have we ever considered part-time teachers? Has that ever been a consideration? I remember years ago, I knew a couple of people who, in this district, who were part-timers and they shared a classroom. So they didn't get benefits because they weren't full-timers. but they worked so well together, and it was always so interesting to me. So maybe I don't know if it was a first grader or if it was a first and second grade combined, but either way, they shared responsibilities, they shared the entire day, and it was so flexible that, let's say, for example, someone had a doctor's appointment, they were able to even switch morning or afternoon, but the part-time, the flexibility of having that part-time position saved us in terms of budget, but it still provided the services for the students that were needed. I'm just
So
curious.
through the chair, I
is
think
that-
Mr. Bath thinks we have a few now. I have learned very quickly that our principals are very innovative in providing solutions to their problems. One of which is 8th period or the additional teaching supplement, which is, rather than buy a whole new teacher at 22% benefits, I can give out, 6 supplements to different teachers. They give up one of their 2 planning periods and are obviously compensated 1/8 of their salary for that. Comes at a tremendous savings. And they're exploring the possibility of maybe splitting. I'll teach the first semester, you teach the second semester, so I can keep some of my planning. So, for us not to listen to principals who've got some of the solutions to problems that we haven't even thought of yet would not be a best practice. But we do have things like that and are always willing to listen and try those things out. Through the chair.
Yeah, and talk about the positions. It's got to be the right situation too. Ideally, you wouldn't really want to have much sharing of that at the primary grades, but as you progress upwards, especially now, since we're going on the 8 scheduled day or 2 days in the block, you could alternate off and on. So, like Dr. Moore said, the best way to learn solutions is to listen to the people that are in the trenches oftentimes, and they come to us with some great ideas, and it's what's best for students, and fiscally it helps also, so we've been working with them on that.
If we can consider that, it might actually reduce our need for subs.
True.
Okay. Through the chair, 2 more final comments. One, it was mentioned by Ms. Berenborg that we have a new process whenever a school or a district issues a PO today. They have to identify what strategic plan it aligns with. So that's on the expenditure side, so that's kind of like on the back side. Strat plan here tied to the budget is on the front stage, so now when they spend money, they have to tie to it. Number 2, if you remember correctly, we came to the board and approved the purchase of high school laptops of about 5,000 units. Happy to say those items have been delivered. They're currently being etched, and they'll be in the hands of the schools at the start of school.
Most of it's already been asked and answered and addressed. The ESSER funding. You note in this that the ESSER funding has been received. Has it also been expended, or is it still yet to be expended?
Which particular ESSER? So let's take ESSER 2.
1 and 2.
One has been fully expensed and drawn down. So we've expended it, shifted expenditure, drawn down in cash. The second one, ESSER 2, is 13. We were advance funded 6, and we drew down 5.
And you mentioned that ESSER 3 doesn't expire until 2024. What about 1 and 2? 2 in particular, if we still have some left. Does it say it in there? Because then I can look it up. You don't have to.
ESSER 1 expires in September of 22, ESSER 2 expired in September of 23, and ESSER 3 in September of 24.
Got it. So
But
it's,
my practice is as soon as they tell me I can draw down the money, I'm gonna find a way to draw it down.
right. So one of the things that is a concern for some people is that we may be seeing a resurgence of COVID. We may or may not. We don't know how that's going to affect us at all right now. I'm assuming that the ESSER funds could be used for any expenses we might incur due to that, correct?
Absolutely.
And that they would be held or intended specifically for that, were we to have to readjust in any way?
Correct. Either in one of 2 scenarios. One, because of the shift in ESSER 1, ESSER 2, fund balance increased.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Remember, in ESSER 1, we drew down the cash early, so therefore
Yes.
was able to increase my fund balance. So you have those funds. 2, ESSER 2 balance is still out there.
Yeah.
Once they release it, one of 2 things can happen. One, something happens in the resurgence of COVID, we put those items in that grant, we draw the funds down, and that funds that funding source. let's assume COVID stays quiet for a while and we still shift some funding around in order to use the balance of that 6 million, that would shift into fund balance.
Right.
And now I need that 6 million to go do help with the COVID reassurance.
Right,
yes,
so we
ma'am.
can move to and from the general fund with the
Yes.
ESSER funds as you've done in the past.
Yes.
Can the 30 million ESSER 3 funds, some of the things that you meant, like air purification or whatever, can the ESSER 3 funds, the 30 million, which is a significant amount, can that be used for capital expenses?
To the chair, yes, ma'am. As long as it meets the requirement of
As
the
long
ESSER.
as it meets the, so if we wanted, well, I'm not going to hypothesize,
Couldn't build a
but,
school with it, but you could do new air quality, things like that.
but we could, let's just say, repurpose a part of a school for a particular, if we wanted a certain area devoted to, I'm completely making this up.
That would
but,
all depend on-
like a math center, let's say, or a STEAM center.
If we could tie that, it has to be used for learning losses. So if we
Right.
can make a case in the grant that, hey, I've had significant learning losses, I need to create an ABC lab in order to gain that, we'd have to see if it passed muster, yes, to the
Okay.
chair.
Yeah, and then my only other thing is marginally petty. While Dr. Moore feels that he wants to advocate for you because you won't do it for yourself, I actually want a huge shout out to Ms. Copeman, who we continue to refer to as Kim while everybody else is referred to as Mr. and Doctor. So Ms. Copeman, thank you for everything that you do, I know, to support this work. That's it.
Thank you for that acknowledgement for Kim.
Ms.
Or
Copeland?
Ms. Copeman.
To the chair, I call her Kimmy, so.
All right, in public spaces, we tend to be more formal, and we seem not to be acknowledging that for her, so I want to do that.
Okay.
That concludes that item, and just to echo, all formal names included, the body of work is really amazing. And from where it was upon Mr. Fagan's arrival and where it is now, it is really maximizing not only his talents, the talents of the entire team. So it is a body of work we all should be proud of. The next item on the agenda is aligning policies with the newly created state board rule. As you know, Governor through the Board of Education created new state board rule. I was asked to look at policies in which that state board rule would align to our own policies. Mr. Meyer and staff looked at that work, shared it with our school board attorney, created those. I then sent those to Ms. Rosario, who is the maker of this particular item. We are required to implement these state board rules as they are written. So that's kind of where we are at. We can do it through board policy. We could support that. We could do it through standing procedure, which I could lead that work. I do want to be clear, as it relates to critical race theory, it's not in the standards, Florida standards. It's not something that we as a district endorse. So there is, we can implement as written, as designed, without changing or modifying any practice. And I think some of the work that's taking place under the leadership of Mr. Meyer and team regarding common planning, regarding pacing guides, and truly evaluating what we're putting in the hands of teachers is significantly going to enhance the quality of instruction. It's significantly going to ensure that our students are being exposed to the standards and the rigor of the standards, or the complexity of the standards. So there's a body of work that's being done that safeguards this particular district. So very, very proud of that. But with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Rosario.
Thank you. Dr. Moore and I have talked about this. I know as a board, we've talked about this several months ago. Dr. Moore brought us some policies that had to deal with bullying and harassment and some other policies. And we had a discussion, board members, about where these types of items would fit within the policies. At that point, it was, that discussion ended with the hopes for developing a policy that would address these items. And then shortly after that, we received the board ruling. So the board ruling, obviously, as you all know, is amendment to the Rule 6A 1.095 4124. And basically, it just takes the required ruling and Mr. Meyer put it within the policies that you see here. They are embedded within curriculum development, professional development, all as backups. And I think that's it. That's all I have. It's curriculum development and professional development. I think Mr. Meyer did a great job in embedding the rule within these particular policies. The rule itself, there are some areas that I think needed to be tweaked that I did send Mr. Meyer in an email. But other than that, I think that this is a way for all of us to just really quiet the storm. This is a way for all of us to close the book on this chapter and ensure complete transparency, really allow the community to know that we have listened to them and that we are not only not teaching critical race theory, but we are certainly not by way of this rule. This also, as Dr. Moore mentioned, it does safeguard our practices. It helps to safeguard our teachers. There was a statement by Jacob Oliva, the Chancellor for K-12 Education at the Florida Department of Education, and he said that this rule would make sure that teachers follow state academic standards and that they don't go rogue, essentially, in their classrooms. I'll add that it creates also a check and balance of sorts and ensures that administrators and district leaders are also doing the exact same thing, ensuring that we are sticking to the standards. And one of the ways for us to safeguard the standards is in creating, and drafting these policies. So with that, I will just allow for comment.
Dr. Jones?
Well, as I look at the information in state statute, I was just looking at a few things in 100342, and it's very, very clear in state statute what is to be taught. And the examples that we have regarding this in social studies, from Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, what grade levels they are, family life, personal health, all of this in state statute. And I guess my one question is, why would this be the one that we put in our policy when it's very, very clear in state statute 100342 what is expected to us? The history of the United States, including the period of discovery, early colonies, the war for independence, Civil War, expansion of the United States and its present boundaries, and it goes into specifics. So every time a political issue comes up, do we want to really look at it for policy when it's already in state statute and it's already the law and our teachers are aware of it? I remember one time we were discussing this, and I can't remember which board member said, well, who do we trust if we say we're not teaching this? Well, we trust the people sitting at this table. We trust our teachers. We trust our administrators. And we trust that we're going to follow state statute and the law. So I don't think it is necessary for policy, because I think we're going down a slippery slope. Every time we get a state statute, do we want to put it in our board policy? So that's my feeling on that one.
May I respond? This rule is not state statute. I do have the statute that you were referring to as 1003.42.
Right.
And you're right, I don't see this in our policy. But that's not the issue. This statute that you mentioned is not at hand. What we're talking about is the ruling. The ruling is not a statute. The ruling is a requirement by the DOE that I just think it would be smart of us to capture and encapsulate it in our policy. Because it's a ruling, it is not a statute.
Okay, well, I think the statute covers it, so I don't think we need the ruling and policy.
Well, this statute that you mentioned does not include this ruling.
I just disagree.
Yeah, I got it.
Dr. Schiff?
I can be simple and direct, or depending on how far we go with this, I can be broader. For reasons similar to Dr. Jones, I don't support this. I don't think we need to put it in policy. It's in state standards. It's, I believe, premature. There are many things under revision right now that may be coming down the pike. I don't want to do this, to do anything piecemeal. As Dr. Moore said, most obviously, we're not doing this. We're not teaching it. It's not in our standards. I don't know how we're going to monitor and surveil teachers. It needs Neola review. It needs, and this is something that personally, I think the board should charge the superintendent with or with not individual board members. I believe this is something that when we charge a superintendent with reviewing policy, we do that as a board. Otherwise, he's answering individually to 5 separate board members with 5 separate interests, with 5 separate ways of what we may or may not want to see in policy. But I agree with Dr. Jones. I think 1003.2, which is it? 42. Make that sure I have that right. I have it pulled up. 1003.42 covers exactly what we can and can't teach. I think if we are running after everything that comes down the pike as a ruling, not as statute, but as a ruling, we are, I agree with Dr. Jones, going to find ourselves on a really slippery slope. So I could say more, but I'll stop there, but I don't support putting this in policy.
Mrs. Berenborg, comments?
Sure. Question I have is, will Neola be updating policies on critical race theory?
We don't know.
Through the chair, Neola, on an annual, or sometimes twice a year, will update policies based on updates in law. I would have to defer or ask Suzanne or Pam if they provide recommended changes to policy based on state board rule. I don't know. I can't say, depending on the direction in which the board tells me to go. I have not sent this to Neola yet, but obviously my recommendation would be that they would review it if it was the pathway forward. But yes, they will, to be direct in answering your question, they will provide recommendations in the coming month or two that we will work through staff to bring to you as we always do once we have them. To this point, we don't have them. Is that?
Because I appreciate the fact that Mr. Rosario wants to put this into policy and make it very clear. But I do hesitate a little bit because we have done that before and then had to reverse it because of Neola coming out with a policy. My question is, I'd rather hesitate and wait for Neola's policy, and if they don't have one coming forward in the next month or two, then yes, I think bring this back, Mr. Rosario.
Dr. Moore, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that.
No, through the chair, no. That is the dilemma that we're in. Neola, I don't know that they're going to provide a policy based on state board rules. Is that something they typically do?
It's based on, we have reached out to Neola, and Neola has said that any new policies for legislative changes will be available at the end of August, 1st of September. They do not have any information to share with us at this point in time because we wanted to get some information even on the parent right bill, all of that. So they've asked us to, of course, defer to our attorney, but to wait. They do not have that information, and they will not be releasing it until they finish their work on their end.
And you said
Okay,
that was
so
on.
I have a follow-up then. I did ask Representative Grahl to come and speak about the bill now law because I wanted to look at a guideline, not a policy change. And I think that's the important difference here is that I was asking for a guidance for parents versus an actual policy that we put in place, because I think we should wait on that policy until we get Neola's policy coming down to us. And I think the same thing for this. Let's get it right and let's do it with Neola.
Ms. DeAgresta, you want to comment, please?
Yes, thank you. Neola will update its draft policies with regard to statutory changes as well as regulatory changes, both on the state and federal level. So to the extent Neola believes that specific language needs to be updated with regard to this regulatory change, it will be part of their recommendations in their next set of policy recommendations.
And when you mention regulatory, you're talking about this rule.
Yes, I'm sorry. When I say regulatory, it's any rule that may be adopted by a state or federal agency. So State Board of Education rules are regulatory in nature. If something comes out of the U.S. Department of Education on a similar topic, it's a federal regulatory issue. And so all of that information is reviewed by Neola as part of what they provide to you as a school board for rulemaking, and then they'll incorporate what they believe is necessary into the policy.
Can we send anything to Neola in advance for review?
I'll begin to answer that question. I'll Ms. Dampier add to it or completely modify what I'm saying. We have reached out to them on a number of occasions. Ms. Dampier, I don't want to put words in her mouth. Her concern that they're sharing with her is that we should stop doing that. You want to
Stop doing what? Reaching out to them?
Well, not reach out, and that is an overstatement, that they're making recommendations regarding their review, and then we make modifications on top of that. We have the absolute right to do so. But our changes or modifications sometime put them in a situation where they feel as if you're, the protection that we have by using Neola, we'll lose it. Can you say that better?
And we go through that process for a reason, and Neola was very clear, and our attorney was a part of that process because I asked that question with a couple of policies that we had a few months back as reference to changing some of the wording. They said at that point in time, then it becomes our wording, and they can't support at that point if there's litigation and things of that nature regarding that policy, because we've changed it. We have like 8 or 9 cell policies that I've asked about, and combining that, if we were to combine it, then of course that would change the language, and it could possibly open us up to liability at that point. So that's why we go through that process, and that's why we've hired them to help us look at the policies, look at the language. Of course, the board members have the authority to change it, but when we change it so much that it's out of, what their agreement is with the policy, then it opens ourselves up to where it's our policy now and that they can't support it. And I think I sent an email to board members about that because there was a policy a couple of months ago that we had, we wanted to change, and they just really steered us against combining policies, changing policies, and all of that.
Well, I think that we run the risk of putting the cart before the horse here. And the best thing to do is let Neola provide whatever guidance they intend to provide, if they, and I'm assuming they will, and then we can revisit it. But at this point in time, I don't think there's anything we should be doing, other than thank you for, suggesting that we be more specific with language. I would hate to have it be interpreted in a political context, because education should not be political, although in this day and age there's almost nothing that you do or say that isn't interpreted in one form or another. But I think it seems to me the consensus here is to hold off, see what's forthcoming, and then we can react accordingly.
All right, the next item is our strategic plan, and I apologize in advance because, excited as I am, I think some of the information I've already covered. So what I will do, Ms. Berenborg, we're going to take your picture off the screen and throw up the presentation, and there is
You're more excited about the pictures and the colors than you are the content.
Well, my strategic plan, it is color coordinated, so hopefully I don't get the same trouble Mr. Fagan did.
I get it.
But I'm excited to bring this plan, and I've kind of already shared. I think this is a very fluid document. I've had the opportunity over the summer to go present at the Model Schools Conference and share this plan, and a number of both district administrators and principals asked for models of it. you all know, earlier in June, I had the opportunity to present at our School Board Association and Superintendent joint summer meeting, and had the opportunity to share this model with board members from other districts that asked for it. Matter of fact, superintendents were like, please stop sending this information to my board members. But I send it because the level of alignment, I think it models transparency. I think it models accountability, as this strategic plan ultimately is the superintendent's evaluation system in terms of it being aligned. And it models, it drives our budget. It ensures that this cabinet is constantly having the conversation around what is our strategic plan, what are our priorities. So I want to go over the plan in terms of some overall changes and thinking and evaluating the current plan. One of the biggest things you're going to notice is the level of alignment between the district strategic plan and the court-required African American Achievement Plan as a result of our joint plan and strive for unitary status. That African American Achievement Plan was a 370-page report. A lot of that was data. That was just that. It was data, not aligned or linked in any specific way. As we evaluated the creation of those two separate plans, it was not the appropriate way in which to do this work. What you see here is a aligned document that supports all areas of the work. It is a deeper focus, a very specific focus in the most important areas that will eliminate the most number of barriers. So we are improving the level of implementation, the fidelity to that implementation by really taking the time needed to align the energy and resources within this plan. So you have a 370-page document down to a 20-page document, very specific, driving the work of the school system. You'll notice there's some changes. We have replacement of strategies identified to be fully implemented and sustainable. So there are a number of strategies, unlike other improvement plans or strategic plans, that remain the same over 5 years. We intentionally looked as a team at each of the strategies, went through a data-driven process. Do we feel as if that work has been done? If the answer is yes, what do we do next? How do we push and grow this system by taking the next step? That same level of thinking led to revisions of strategies ready for the next stage of implementation, really continuing to grow that work. Increase in targets, which I've kind of already let that cat out of the bag. There are 6 targets that we're expanding or pushing to the next level, and that's a target that's our 2025. That target is still 4 years out. So we're proud of us holding ourselves accountable and forecasting pushing that number further out. As we move into further years, we look to continue to grow this plan. So we did not this year because of COVID. If you recall, those of you that were on the board, my goal was to ensure this plan always stayed 5 years out. So next year when I bring this plan and we have a more stabilized school year, I will bring a plan that isn't just ending in 2025, but ultimately we add 2026, continuing to grow the district and forecasting out always 5 years where we want to be, continuing to take that marker that we set out 5 years in advance and moving it out into the ground further, and just not being, oh, we're really close, we're almost there. That's not our model of thinking. We've also done some clarification of language for increased understanding for strategies and/or outcomes. So as we've done this work for a year, there were opportunities to adjust or modify some of those language, and we'll go over some of that in a minute, and modifications of annual targets based on 2021 outcomes. So when you look at what that means, I've mentioned we have 6 targets for 2025 that have been adjusted. 3 of those targets come in communication and engagement. And we credit some of those adjustments or modifications based on what we've learned in the midst of COVID. We had to force ourselves to be more dependent on how we're communicating and engaging with our families. And as a result, we think some of the initial targets that were created, we sustained that work to push it out or to go further. We have 2 that are increased in focus area 2, which is equity, culture, and climate. Once again, looking at how we've done the work over the course of the last year, looking at shifts in demographics and COVID to make those adjustments, and then one modification or increased expectation in the area of Focus Area 5, which is aligned to our health and safety inspection. When you look at our annual targets, we've made some changes to those annual targets as well, as mentioned. So if you look at Focus Area 4, there were previous targets and they were redundant. So going from 6 targets down to 4 allows us to move that target forward. In Focus Area 5, that was Mr. Fagan, and I've spoke about this as well. We've already created the SAM model. We don't need to continue to wait 4 more years to adjust or modify that strategy. District realignment has taken place 3 times over the course of the last year. So creating those annual targets or modifying them allows us to continue to push the work forward. And then when you look at the annual strategies, if you were to compare the two, and board members compare the two, specifically, you'll see significant changes in our strategies. Focus Area 1, all of them have been changed. Academic performance, we felt those strategies have been fully implemented and done at a level that will build sustainable practices, so we've ramped them up and selected new ones. In Focus Area 2, we have 3 that are new, 1 remaining the same. And Focus Area 3, 1 updated language change, minor edits, and we'll look at in the slide that I'm about to present. And then 2 new, 1 that are same. Focus Area 4, we've updated 1 for language, 2 new, 1 remains the same. And Focus Area 2 that are new, 4 that remain the same. And that, again, is something I'm very proud of because it just shows the progress of the work. And just some samples that I've pulled out of the plan for presentation purposes. When you look at what does a replacement strategy mean, which is the top bar, strategy 1.2, revise and implement a comprehensive research-based reading plan to optimize student performance in reading. Mr. Meyer has proposed that we have completed that, so we have replaced that with a new strategy. So that now becomes foundational to some of those strategies that you see in our annual strategies for Focus Area 1. Revision of a strategy, which highlights the continuous improvement. So rather than implement and plan, well, let me just read it as it is, implement a plan that builds upon our We Promise program and incorporates strategies to support current employed instructors. So we established We Promise last year, but we want to continue to build upon that We Promise and that initiative. So we've changed the language to be a little bit more specific. The blue looks at a target fully achieved or almost fully achieved that we're pushing out. So an example of that is the parent access to a Focus, the Focus portal, changing it from 85 to 90 based on the level of accomplishment this specific year. And then clarification in language for increased understanding. You look at strategy 3.1, implement varied approaches to engage community members in district activities while offering at least 2 in-person. And why do we say in person? Because the volume was so high last year, in some ways misleading because of the level of engagements that we did with families and community because of the pandemic. If you just looked at the Facebook Lives that I did, we could tell the community, yeah, we've reached that, we superseded that particular goal, but the reality is that was in response to a pandemic, so we want to continue to grow that specific area. These are opportunities above and beyond Mr. Fagan's presentation with our strategic plan that we want to continue to support. These would be opportunities for our external partners, the Ed Foundation, for us to look for partnership within some specific areas to enhance this strategic plan. So expand access to extracurricular and extended learning activities. What we're doing in our after-school space is really been some outstanding work. But higher levels of alignment and offerings for our students would be beneficial. Expand the provisions of high-quality professional development for staff. We need to continue to invest and incentivize our educators to invest in their craft, which is education, and educating themselves. Increase access to digital learning and resources outside that of the school setting. Are there opportunities to enhance those services for our children? And establish more robust mentorship and support supports for disciplinary alternatives, really looking at that mentorship program that we want to continue to provide, which is one of those maps and opportunities for students to engage in those particular resources. So the pathway moving forward in this strategic plan, the final evaluation for outcomes typically would have already come to the board, but we're still patiently waiting for outcomes from the Florida Department of Education. And as you know, those results have been delayed as a result of the pandemic and the extended window that the state had afforded districts to complete testing or to get as many students tested as possible. We will bring that to the board 1 week from today. That will be, we anticipate getting those results, quickly plugging them into our outcomes. As you know, most of the outcomes that are still pending are under the area of academic success. Other than that, we have the majority of those, and they look really, really good and promising in terms of our performance over the course of the last year. Verifications or modification of targets based upon finalized of outcome data. We may change some, but we don't think that we're going to. I think what's being recommended in this, in terms of targets, are safe to go forward. And I think it's worth noting, because of the pandemic, you're going to see various shifts in outcomes. And we were very proactive, and I cannot find another strategic plan that is created this way. We created a strategic plan that, in Focus Area 1, compares us to the other 66 districts in the county. Because standards are changing, we went in that particular direction. And now with the pandemic, it continues. We all responded to the pandemic in different ways based on where we are within the state of Florida, based on where families felt comfortable. So a lot of what we're going to receive, this information, is in parts in terms of our evaluation of our response to this unprecedented time and modifying instructional environments, creation of new instructional models to meet the needs of children. So we're going to learn a lot from this data, but I don't think it's going to take us off path from our benchmarks that we set for 2025 in terms of academic outcome. The implementation of T25 in our African American Achievement Plan will bring that to the board, and I will continue to provide the quarterly updates to the board as we move throughout the year. That would be where we are, and we are aligning dashboards to that so to be more friendly both for the community as well as board members and anybody else who wants to monitor the progress of the school district of Indian River County on a quarterly basis or ongoing basis. So formal presentations continuing to model the level of accountability that any public system would need to be successful. So those are the overall shifts. I know we had the opportunity to look at the different focus areas, the modifications or changes in strategy. Just very, very proud of this work. The majority of this work is Dr. Jacobs, and she literally is herding cats. And these would be the cats right here, to force them and to engage in conversations with their teams or collectively to create this strategic plan and ensuring that we are aligned in purpose in doing this work, and this strategic plan continues to drive and set the expectation for this district. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Questions? Mrs. Berenborg, you're first up.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate this presentation. I know it's difficult because you don't have all of the data, and I know once you get all the data back, I'm sure you'll give us a presentation of the data and you know, all the wonderful data points that we've been shown before. A question, are you going to input the data into the same presentation? Are we going to see a different presentation once it's all out? Because I imagine we're going to see a lot more as far as data slides go.
Yeah, the answer to that question is yes. At our 27th approval of the budget, I have an action item that will be posted, which will look at those annual targets. It will have the baseline that was established using the 1920 school year. It'll have the 2021 target as well as the outcome, and then forecast it out to 2025. So anyone will be able to look at and say, here is where the district started. This was their goal for 2021. This is the actual outcome for 2021. and this is the target 4 years out for 2025. And we'll be able to note that progress, and as I said, I think it's going to be a very, very interesting year. I think the system as a whole should be celebrating the efforts of everyone in the system, because it was a year that like no other in terms of reacting to and creating scenarios and programming that had never existed before. We should be proud of the effort, and I think the outcome will bear that out.
Speaking of the data, have they given you any indication as to when we're going to start seeing more scores come back, or we have no idea?
Ms. Berenberg, when you said pending outcomes, I wanted to go look at my phone to see, has they been released yet? We are anticipating any day now. The commitment is the end of the month by the Florida Department of Education. So we continue to check back with them. We're hopeful that we get it the next day or two.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I know that you were tying some evaluations to that data. Are those evaluations then pending from last year, or did you just go ahead and do evaluations without the data because of COVID?
I have not finalized the evaluations for the cabinet or principals as well. A piece of that data is dependent, and I understand the variance of the scenario last year, but I think it makes for a very, very fruitful conversation regarding what the outcome is. So I didn't want to model one process with the board where I am looking at and being evaluated based on the data and do something different for staff. Now, I will tell you this, I can't find one of my colleagues who thinks that's a good move. They all say exactly the opposite. Well, our goal and our objective last year was safety. So this is being bold and courageous and saying we have an expectation to provide quality education for our children, even in the midst of a pandemic. So we have learned a great deal. I think the shifts and modifications to this strategic plan are reflective of that. But I do think even in the midst of a pandemic, you're going to see progress academically in comparison to what the other 66 districts were able to accomplish.
So board members then have an extended time then to do our evaluation for the superintendent, correct?
Hopefully not. Hopefully we get that data in and we're able to move this work forward. But we'll play that by ear, and we're at the mercy of the state.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Dr. Schiff, you?
I don't have a lot. I really appreciate how organized this is, I have to say. In the past, we have not always gotten this in such a way that the target is per year, the strategy for that year. So I really appreciate the organization of it. There is one typo in the beginning. You've probably been made aware of it. Mrs. Berenborg is not from District 1. She's District 4 on the first page. That's minor, obviously.
Okay.
But, there aren't two District 1 people.
Okay.
One of the things that I have heard, I know that you have, and I support it, an intention of reducing suspensions generally and reducing out-of-school suspensions completely. One of the frustrations that I hear from teachers is an alternative. They need an alternative. They need some practice or some strategy that allows them to hold students accountable and feel that there is some approach to discipline without feeling like they are pressured into simply minimizing discipline or occurrences in the classroom or in the school. Can you speak a little bit to how that's happening?
Absolutely, and you are 100% correct. I hear the same thing as well. And one of the action steps that we took is to create a joint committee between the bargaining, our teachers as well as district staff to look at the progressive discipline at school sites. Ms. Dampier is rolling out some programming going into the new school year regarding what I would call indoor suspension, helping students stay in school, correct the behavior, empower them with the appropriate behaviors, and then get them back in class as quickly as possible. Mr. Meyer, through the work of common planning and looking at quality instruction drives discipline. There's no two different ways about it. Quality instruction will eliminate the behavior in the classroom. So creating those systems. So, looking forward to getting feedback from that committee on what additional recommendations and changes, but we are being responsive to what teachers are saying. And towards the end of the school year, that's when that burden was felt the most.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree and disagree with you. Sorry. I agree with you about the importance of quality instruction. Obviously, and I appreciate the ways in which you're causing that to happen, and we're seeing that in some of our outcomes. So clearly, it's working. What I disagree with you about, though, is that it's fully about instruction. Kids come to school with a whole host of experiences and background that we have no idea, that the best teacher in the world cannot necessarily overcome without a comprehensive range of supports for those kids. So sometimes the behavior is really a cry for help. The behavior is a call to action. It's not simply about the instruction. So those are the kind of supports that I know we're working on building in, but I believe that if we build those supports, we go a long way to supporting teachers to be great teachers by supporting students to be great and attentive students.
So we don't disagree. Completely agree. And I think one of the biggest opportunities for improvement, which is when an intervention is being provided, we want to see a change in behavior. We want to see a student just not removed from an environment in which we're taking a break and then coming back and displaying the same exact behavior.
Because we've never gotten to the root.
Because we never gotten to the root, or we didn't have the structure in place, or we didn't free up the counselors in a way in which to really work with the child to say, what is that behavior that needs to be addressed? What is that system of support? How do we connect with the parents to support that? We now have those systems in place. We have the parent, I keep on saying the parent academy, but the parent engagement office. We have the success coaches in place, a full year of training. We have the Aspire teachers, which is indoor, not just, who's the, we called it indoor suspension in Miami, and typically, what it was in most schools was just go sit here in a cold room and not ever want to come back. That doesn't change the behavior, but really ensuring that the person or persons in that room have the ability to work with the child to help modify that behavior and not lose instruction is the program that Ms. Dampier and team are leading to implement. So we have a combination of things in place to improve upon what's taking place in the classroom, and the umbrella of services that surround or cover that classroom also will be enhanced.
I know she wants to jump in, but I also want to add to that, and this may be part of what you're about to say in any case. Sometimes it's not just about modifying the behavior of the student, right? Sometimes there are things going on that are not simply about we need to fix the student, but there are greater issues. We need to include the teachers. We need to look at the material. We need to look at what students are coming, what skills and strategies and capacities students are coming to school with in the first place. So I don't want us to necessarily just go down a line of, down a path of we just need to fix students. Because and I don't believe that's actually what you're saying. I just want to clarify that it could be heard that way, and that's again, not the full approach. We don't need to belabor it for purposes of the strategic plan, but I can see that Ms. Dampier wants to jump in. So.
Through the chair, yes, there's going to be, we have a boot camp plan for our success coaches as well as all-year planning for our success coaches, and we're going to utilize them differently. Last year, they were being reactive, picking up students, taking them to their office. We want them inside the classroom working with students as well as working with teachers who are having behavioral problems. We also implemented the prevention intervention specialist last year that did a lot of coaching and modeling. They even got on the bus and did that training with our transportation. They rode the bus with some of our most neediest students to correct that behavior, and also work with the bus drivers as well, our bus attendants, to make sure that there were strategies that they could utilize while on the bus, because it's very challenging when you have students on the bus and they're not behaving as you would like them. So you have to redirect that behavior. So we had to model that behavior, and that is the plan for next year. We also want to make sure that in our Aspire classroom, we have restorative circles in there, as well as a place for reflection and reentry where they're meeting with that Aspire teacher before they go back to class, because we don't want to see them back in the same scenario. We're also going to be monitoring to see if students are repeating those same behaviors and modifying that as well. As well as our Aspire teachers will be going in the classroom, monitoring those students who were in their classroom when they don't have students in their Aspire classrooms. So we want to build that culture on that campus where students, they want to come to school, and they're in their space instead of always removing them outside of the classroom, working with them inside the classroom, and that's going to be some work with our school counselors as well. And we're going to be doing a lot of training with that preschool and onboarding that for next year as well. So it's going to be a lot of training and support and coaching with our team.
Great, thank you.
So it's not a one and done.
Thank you. That's it for now. I'll stop for now and let fellow board members jump in and reserve the right to come back, if need be.
Dr. Jones?
I think this format really flows. I like it better than the 300 and some pages. Dr. Jacobs, just how you combine that with the African American Achievement Plan under Dr. Moore's request, I think is beautiful. I think my favorite page in this is the guiding principles that we use with all of our students and what the transformational impacts are. And the first one that says all students are accepted and included within our school community. Dr. Schiff's statement about, discipline and so forth, that's an age-old issue. You can talk about it all day, but when you have that connection, number one, you have that student engagement, and yes, the instructional delivery, and connecting with the parents and the families and the students to see what the issues are. And she's absolutely right. When students come onto a campus and they feel welcome, that's half the battle. Then you go from there. And how do you make them feel welcome? By listening. The teachers working with them one-on-one when they can, but there's a lot of issues that go into that. But when it clicks, it's absolutely beautiful. And when we look at the impacts in general with our African American Achievement Plan and what we want to do to increase our data there, it just really ties into all of our focus areas. And job well done, young lady. Thank you.
Ms. Rosario?
Okay, so thank you for putting all of this together. I mean, we have talked quite a bit about these. I have one question on page 10. The annual strategy, AAAP 1.1 on the bottom. We talked about this privately, but I don't see anything here after our discussion. So my question is, it reads, implement a curriculum matrix that integrates African American history teachings in grades K through 12 and is included in the curriculum map.
Well, Dr. Jacobs is going to answer the question, but I think that was already updated, and I think, is that?
No, not on the new one, at least not on the backup that was in the thing. So I
Correct.
just didn't know, oh, correct.
So it was already posted before you had provided the feedback, so we haven't been able to make a change to it yet.
Oh, okay, so what are we changing?
So we will
How-
talk
how
about
will
the
it read? Okay, I'm sorry.
the language. We haven't finalized the language change there, but we do have it noted that we will be changing that particular item.
Okay, okay. And only something along the lines of, we're not creating a new curriculum.
Correct.
And everything is going to be aligned to the standards.
Right.
Right.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
This is just wonderful, it's fantastic. I'd just like to make a statement to new board members, if you're unfamiliar, based on the targets and based on the, what Dr. Moore has mentioned here, that's where we evaluate Dr. Moore, obviously. I'm sure you've had these conversations. And his evaluation was specifically strategically aligned to the strategic plan so that we can do it this way. But one of the things, Dr. Moore, that I don't see on your evaluation plan, and I might be off, is that at the end, at the end of the evaluation, I don't see an overall rating. I just see individual ratings. Did we discuss an overall rating? I'm not sure if I can remember
As we
correctly.
engage in those conversations and I receive that information from each individual board member, I'll report back to the board. So I'm going to send you additional information with each of the areas, which is my own personal reflection regarding opportunities for improvement, accomplishments, kind of the next steps. You'll receive that Wednesday or Thursday. And then once I receive that information from you, what I report back will be the overall findings from the consensus of the board, the average, basically.
So you're going to provide, what I understand is you're providing for us a reflection prior
Yes.
to receiving our evaluation?
Yes.
And you don't want our evaluation and then include
I want to give you
your first
my-
reflections?
my thoughts as well, which is an internal kind of my own reflection regarding each of those specific areas. Where were the strengths? If it wasn't, I'm trying to hold to have the data available as well. Now you have, because you do this in isolation, right? You'll do this and we'll engage in these conversations Thursday and Monday, depending on the days in which we meet. We'll engage in that conversation, which gives you the opportunity to complete the document, select any ratings, and then we come back as a whole, whether it's at the upcoming board meeting or a future board meeting, depending on the outcome of data. Then you have the full representation of all board members.
So remind me again, because I don't have your contract in front of us. Your contract that maybe Suzanne knows. Your contract states that your end evaluation and your evaluation should be at the end of July, right? Is there a specific date?
I think it's the end of July, so.
Just by before
Which is,
July 31st?
in most years, that's not an issue. But, Florida Department of Education
Right.
said we give it to you by the 31st.
Well, we always have this issue. Every year we discuss, every year that I've been here, we discuss the same thing. It's like data doesn't come until after an evaluation. So and this came up, Dr. Schiff will know and Mrs. Barenborg, that when we went through the superintendent changing, it was kind of like, okay, wait a minute, the prior superintendent, do we wait for the evaluation? Do we not? Do we put it off? I mean, how do we evaluate a superintendent prior to the new year? If there was something, which isn't the case now, but if there was something drastic that needed to happen and a decision needed to happen, we're kind of stuck writing in the contract that your evaluation is on X date, but data doesn't come until after that. So it wouldn't be rightly reflective.
Right,
And it's always an issue. I mean, it's not anything that we
It
can.
should not be an issue, and not to speak for, or on behalf of anyone who was here before me, the data that you need to evaluate, typically for the last 15 years, would be available. So in coming years, I don't think it would be a problem. Now, as they shift or modify the standards of the assessment system, which they're going to engage in the coming years, there would be an opportunity to say, simple language change in a contract if data is available, or soon thereafter when data is available. So I don't see it as a major obstacle.
Okay, and just for clarification, for public knowledge, last year we did not engage in an official evaluation of you. It was agreed that it would be based on reflection, I believe.
Right, so-
I think the word was reflection, and board members would provide you with feedback on that.
Correct.
Some board members did, others did not last year, right?
Correct.
So I hope that all board members would engage in providing feedback through this evaluation process this year. In past years, there had been on some area, not with this board, with previous superintendents, I've looked at years and years and years of past evaluations, and I've seen some evaluations where some board members kind of left an entire area blank and just did a check, or would fill in, you're doing a great job, and there was nothing of substance to provide to the superintendent in terms of, your feedback, your honest feedback. What your strengths, possibly, areas of improvement, what an evaluation really ought to look like. So I highly recommend board members pay close attention to that, and I hope everybody will complete it accordingly. My last question is, one of the areas, targets for 2025, you mentioned, not within the next year, but by 2025, to achieve a 12% total ending fund balance. So, speaking of budgets, since we just reviewed our budget,
To the chair, you're currently at 12% today,
we are currently at 12% today.
ending fund balance.
Why did I miss that? Where did I not see that? I thought we were at 5
Make
point
sure I said that
something.
right.
It's in the budget executive summary.
Excuse me, you're at 14%.
I think we
Say.
were at 12% last year and at 14% this year pending.
Sorry, my mistake.
Go ahead, Mr. Fagan, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, my mistake, you're currently at 14%.
Where am I missing that?
Page 2 of the executive summary. Middle of the page where it says budget highlights, ending fund balance. And of course, this is tentative, we're not done yet with the year.
Okay, that's what because I have tentative.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, it shouldn't go
Tentative.
down a whole lot, but it could be some fluctuations.
okay. Okay, so, Dr. Moore, do you want to adjust that?
Through the chair, no, because we intentionally want to burn some of that down as we transform the district. So
Okay.
it's intentional because of some of the stuff Mr. Fagan's discussed.
Okay, sounds good.
Just one comment about evaluations. As far as I'm concerned, in practice, boards have really two responsibilities: policy and evaluating the CEO. That is the job. So anyone who chooses not to or hasn't in the past shouldn't be sitting up here.
I agree.
I mean, that's totally unacceptable. I can't imagine it even would come up, but obviously, in the past it has, and I'm glad to note that none of those people are sitting up here today.
Well, I
It's not-
assure you
It's not
the-
fair to the constituents, and it's not fair to the superintendent, so,
I assure you that the five sitting board members are always been very critical and open and honest with me regarding where we are and what we're doing. And as I hope to continue to model, very, very desirable in terms of receiving that feedback. And that kind of discourse and dialogue keeps the district to move forward. And those of you that know me pretty well, no, the most critical person on David Moore is going to be David Moore. But I want to continue to engage in that conversation because you all know the community still to this day better than I know it. And it creates the discourse that is needed to continue to grow. So you guys do a really good job there.
Dr. Jones.
Ms. Rosario, would you please review, because I didn't understand what your recommendation was to Dr. Jacobs on page 10? And this will come up for board approval when we're,
The
okay.
next time around, so.
Yeah, there'll be,
This is for discussion, it's not for.
Right,
approval.
right.
it was,
Worked on it.
go ahead.
Based upon the feedback. So right now, the language that I have crafted was integrate African-American history teachings into curriculum maps for grades K through 12 in alignment with Florida standards.
That was from page 10?
Yes.
Could you read that again? I'm sorry.
Integrate African-American history teachings into curriculum maps for grades K through 12 in alignment with Florida standards. To ensure, and I think one of
Yeah.
the questions was to ensure that we know that the content that's being taught is in alignment with Florida standards.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Mrs.
Jacobs.
Berenborg raised, she had a question. It's on Teams.
You have a, Mrs. Berenborg?
Thank you. First of all, one of the things that when you're talking about student engagement and behaviors and teachers providing engaging lessons, question about training. I haven't seen specific training that's been outlined for next year, or I haven't caught that. Is Kids at Hope still being used as a training technique?
Through the chair, yes, we've spoke to the executive roundtable, and they were just waiting until we had a director of student services before we proceed on. We have about 8 schools that were trained. We added some additional schools. I think the 2019-20 school year, we added additional schools through your support. I remember you gave me the information that those schools, and they took, actually brought another person to train as well. So with what happened last year with the COVID-19, we are working with those schools again this year to make sure that that's implemented with fidelity.
Okay, will we be providing that training for all of our new employees?
We are planning that as a part of our conversation with the Executive Roundtable. We will continue to speak with them about that. As I stated, we were waiting for a director to be hired so we can proceed.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it's being given to our new employees too, because once you give that training, it's like it really needs an update every year, and you can't just assume everybody that's sitting there has seen it or been through it before. And I think it's a wonderful training that helps teachers really help students get engaged. The other question I have is, since the superintendent's evaluation has been brought up, and as well as goals being established for next year, I did bring up his agreement with us, and on page 19, it talks about the annual evaluation and goals. And on the evaluation, it says before the first day in August of every year during the term of this agreement, the superintendent shall report to the school board his progress in meeting goals. I assume that's one-on-one. But then it says during the 2-week period following the delivery of the superintendent's progress report, the school board shall review with the superintendent his progress in meeting the goals and objectives. So I'm assuming then that we listen to you and your report in the end of July, and then we turn around and finish and complete our evaluation like I did last year in August, beginning of August, I think it was.
Through the chair, yeah, that is the process that will begin to play out. I've already sent the form to each board members as a whole. During our individual meetings coming up this week, we'll review and go through the structure of everything. My intent right now, as it stands at the 27th meeting, will be the opportunity to formally present where we are. Then we will follow up individually and then kind of put a bow on it moving forward from there. But absolutely following the process Ms. Barrenborn just stated.
Okay, and then I see on there also it talks about the goals for next year, and then it says on an annual basis, no later than the first available meeting in August each year, the school board and superintendent shall mutually establish measurable goals. So will you have had all of your evaluation meetings done by the time that we are doing that?
Through the chair, yes, and the goals would be stated here within the strategic plan. So those would be the goals that we would be setting and approving.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or suggestions? All right, do we want to take should we want to keep going, or do you want to take a break for, why don't we keep going? If somebody
we have two
needs to
straightforward
take a
items.
break, go ahead.
Just glad we can stop talking about me.
I need 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Pardon me?
I'm good. We can keep going.
He said, do you want to take a break? I said, sure. He said, let's keep going. I'm going to go take a break.
No, I said
That's
if
all I
we
want.
keep going, but if you need to, you know.
Right, so
Yeah,
you said
go.
if you need to take a break,
Yeah,
take a break.
go
So
ahead.
good Lord, this was a long conversation.
I know. Where are you going?
These are very difficult decisions to make.
Our next item, we'll bring back to the floor Mr. Fagan for review of standard contracts coming before the board.
Thank you, Salute, through the chair. I have 3 items. These are two of the contracts are as needed basis, so as we go through next year, if we need these services, these people will be pre-approved, and we will pull on them as necessary for any scope of work necessary. One is for civil engineering for projects not to exceed $200,000. Second item is for hard bid construction projects not to exceed $300,000. The final item is the contract to award the architect for design services for the cafeteria and the expansion cafeteria expansion, and new classrooms at Sebastian River Middle School. Price on this one is approximately $785,000. This will be the design process for those new classrooms at Sebastian River Middle School. Design will pretty much take the full calendar year of 21-22. Might be done early, but you can't do much after that. Construction will start 22-23. Students should be in the building for school year 23-24. Questions?
Our final item is presented by Mr. Meyer, which again, once again, contracts for review and approval.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Through the chair, I have the 3 items, as well as Mr. Fagan, that are annual items that come before the board. A articulation agreement that's annually reviewed and approved with Indian River State College, a dual enrollment agreement with Gates Aerospace, that's our Embry-Riddle dual enrollment program, and the template required to be completed by the Office of Equal Educational Opportunity from the Department of Education. And those are my 3 items.
Questions, comments, Mrs. Berenborg?
I'm good. I already asked him. Thank you.
Okay, Doc?
Just one
Jones?
question on, not even sure this was part of it, but our contract with SROs, that all good to go this year?
Through the chair, the contract is loaded. It's on the reserve site that only board members have access to because of the confidentiality
Sure.
of that. We're working on an MOU that will be coming forward regarding additional support.
Okay.
Anyway, that's, Mr. Chair, those are all the items that we have.
Any other topics to be teed up? If not, I hate to adjourn without Dr. Schiff here, but she got a head start, I guess.
Exactly.
All right, meeting's adjourned at 2:56. We'll see everybody at 6 o'clock.
Thank you.